1. Eve. Then can you tell me when his arraignment is? I asked, going absolutely out of my mind with panic. I couldn't even be sure how I got here. But my keys were in my hand, so I must have driven. Somehow. Ma'am, like I've repeated to you 3 times already, the officer behind the counter said in her nasally annoying voice, Mr. Hayward needs to be fully booked into the system before I have any of that information for you. If you check back in around noon, I'll have an answer for you. She chewed on the end of her pen. For sure by 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock? Was she for real? I wasn't letting Asher sit in a cell for 12 hours. Is there anything you can do to speed up the process? I practically begged as I leaned forward on the counter, desperate to get my brother out of jail. Her head cocked to the side and she lowered her voice. Look, hun, she said, placing her hands on the lower counter. It'll give your boyfriend some time to think about what he's done. It's his first offense. He should be home for supper tonight. Oh my gosh, was she for real? What a condescending witch. I opened my mouth to tell her exactly what I thought of her when I heard and felt someone come up behind me. I'm her boyfriend, I heard Nick say over my shoulder. Next, I felt a warm hand on my back. Can you please inform me of what exactly is going on here? The heat from his hand traveled up my spine and throughout the rest of my body, gave me enough strength to continue standing. Sir, I've explained things several times already to Miss Hayward. Why don't you and your girlfriend, she said, looking me over and frowning, go sit down and have a chat? Nick's arm went around my shoulders. Why don't you and I have a chat, Lieutenant? He said, bending forward to peer at her name tag. Nichols? His tone was quiet and menacing. And to be quite honest, it gave me shivers through my body to hear him speak like that. Lieutenant Nichols gave in with a sigh, then spouted off the whole story for Nick. All I heard was drug charges and intent to distribute to a minor. My brain swam, mixing up everything else that came out of her mouth. I see, thank you, Nick said, straightening up as he moved me away from the counter. I resisted and tried to get out from under his arm. No, I have to get to Asher, I said, trying to walk back to where I'd been standing for what felt like forever. Eve, Nick said in a hushed tone. Come with me and sit down for a minute. I gazed up into his face, confused at what he was doing and why he was removing me from the only person who knew where my brother was. I can't, I have to get to him, I said, trying again to shift out of his hold. He wrapped his arms around me and stared into my eyes. I'm going to handle this. Can you trust me? His big, warm arms hugged me tight to his body. I know what to do. Those words, I know what to do, floated around in the air and I grasped onto them nearly as hard as I held onto Nick. You can help Asher? I asked, feeling a momentary sense of relief before reality set in. No, you can't. I shut my eyes, willing the burning sensation behind them to stop. I would not break down in a police station at 5 o'clock in the morning. Nick's hands landed on my shoulders, making me open my eyes. Yes, I can. Let me make some calls. But first you need to sit down and stop harassing the officer behind the desk, he said with a small smirk on his face. You harassed her more than I did, I said angrily, poking my finger into his chest. That's debatable, my dear, he said, leaning in and kissing my forehead. Now, please do me a favor and sit so I can make a call. Calm expression on his face and the soothing tone of his voice were nearly hypnotic. Okay, I said, deciding to at least let him try things his way for a while. Nothing I had done seemed to work anyway. Good, he said, then guided me to a seat. Nick didn't sit. He pulled out his phone and meandered just far enough away that I couldn't hear what he was saying. Confidence he exuded as he paced around gave me hope. Hope that he'd figure a way out of this mess. My mind had gone from panicked and crazy to still and quiet. I stared endlessly at the flickering, fluorescent lights, wondering if my life would ever stop throwing crap in my direction. It really was one thing after another. A constant loop of life slinging the worst things possible at me. And my family. When Nick finally sat beside me, he grabbed my hand and said, "Don't worry, I'll have this looked after in no time." I peered over at him, doubting more than trusting that there was anything he could possibly do to help. His eyes were so kind, but they also held a good dose of pity in them as well. And that made my stomach sink when I realized he'd essentially known nothing about me or my family until 5 minutes ago. Bile churned around and I had to swallow hard a few times to stop from getting sick. I was sitting here in a police station with one of my Johns. Another surge of alarm rushed into me. I'd given him my name, and now he knew about one of my siblings. It was too late. My Grandma Eve would say, "Darling, the cows are out of the barn." Yeah, they sure freaking were. Nick knew way too much about my life. I took some deep breaths and considered my options. Then I came to the same conclusion. I had none. I'd already blown things with Nick. Our month of fun completely ruined. Not only was my month in a mansion with a hot billionaire over, but I also had messed up getting the giant payday at the end. Half the money Nick had already paid me, I'd have to return seeing as I didn't even last a week there. I let out a sigh and closed my eyes. Asher had gotten himself into a huge amount of trouble. Again, when bail was set, that didn't necessarily mean I'd be able to pay it. My stomach twisted and turned inside me, and I felt another jolt of fear and queasiness wash over me. "Nick!" I heard a man say in front of us right before Nick stood and shook his hand. "Thanks for coming down so quickly. This is Eve, my girlfriend," he said, and the man reached out to shake my hand next. He was an older man, probably close to 60. His suit wasn't as nice as what Nick normally wore, but it was still really nice. I shook his hand as Nick said, "Eve, this is Len." "Hi, nice to meet you," I said, my voice barely registering. I felt so small and overwhelmed. "You too, Eve," he said, shooting me a smile that didn't meet his eyes. Then he looked at Nick and said, "A moment?" "Yeah," Nick said, looking down at me. "I'll be right back. Don't move." And with that, he strode off with Len. They talked in whispered tones, Len nodding often with a serious look on his face. They shook hands again and Nick headed back toward me. "You want anything? I can grab a drink at the vending machine?" He looked so handsome in his white long-sleeved shirt and slacks. So much more sophisticated than how I was dressed. I suddenly felt even more self-conscious. "No, I'm fine, thanks anyway." His eyes raked over me once before he turned and walked away. Len was busy at the counter. Lieutenant Nichols was now flanked by 2 male officers, and they were all in some kind of heated discussion. Each time one of the officers spoke, Len would reply right back, speaking over top of them. I closed my eyes and prayed he'd be more successful than I'd been. "Here," Nick said, making me gaze up at him. He held out a bottle of water and something pink in his hand. I gratefully took the water, suddenly feeling quite thirsty. Then Nick handed me a pack of gum. Cherry gum. Kind I was addicted to. "Oh, thanks." The water felt cool and cleansing going down. I hadn't paid attention to how thirsty I was. By the time I took a breath, 3/4 of it was gone. When I stuffed a piece of gum in my mouth, my shoulders began to relax. Nick sat beside me with a cup of coffee in his hand. He'd taken a few sips and made a face each time. First, I'd thought it was too hot. Then I guessed it probably wasn't up to Nick's high standards. "Not good enough for you?" I asked, surprised to hear a note of teasing in my voice. Nick's head twisted to me and he shook it back and forth. "Nope. It's like swill." That made me laugh softly at him. "You do have discerning tastes, Mr. Rossetti," I said, poking fun at him again. Even if there was nothing he could do, having him here beside me did a world of good. At least I wasn't alone. He turned his body more fully to me, his thumb and index finger grasping my chin. "I think you mean I have the best tastes. In all things." His eyes held mine for a long moment before we were interrupted. "Nick, Eve, follow me, please," Len said. We both quickly looked up and did what he said without hesitation. Instinctively, I reached for Nick's hand and held it tightly. He squeezed mine right back, then tugged me along. Len walked right behind one of the male officers, then Nick after him. They led us through a few sets of electronic doors before we entered a quiet area. I could see small cells on either side of the room, not all of them occupied. The officer stopped abruptly and said, "Your 5 minutes starts now." He looked over the rim of his glasses at Len, then nodded at us. As he marched away, I peeked around Nick's arm to see Asher lying on a bare cot. "Asher?" I whispered loudly, shocked to see him in such a place. My heart felt real, stabbing pain knowing where he was and that there was nothing I could do to help. His head jerked and he sat up, looking confused. "Evie?" he asked, bolting up in his tiny space and nearly running to the bars. I smiled at him and stepped around Nick. "What did you do?" I asked, beginning to sob. There was no warning at all, just suddenly a gush of tears from my eyes. My fingers circled the cold metal bars. He put his hands on top of mine and held them there. "The house taxes were due. I had—" "You say nothing," Nick said in a loud voice, sounding more than a little pissed off. "We have many eyes and ears here. Understand?" Asher frowned as he took in Nick. "Who's he?" "And who's the suit?" he asked, nodding toward the two men he didn't know. "I'm your sister's man, and Len is your lawyer. I suggest you speak to him with more respect than that," Nick said very clearly. "My sister's man?" Asher squinted his eyes at me. "Since when do you have a guy? Can we not talk about that right now?" I asked, not wanting to waste our few minutes talking about my non-relationship. I wiped my eyes and cleared my throat. "How are you?" Asher let go of my hands and stepped away. "Wait, you said you were away on work. Were you?" His head snapped to Nick, then back to me. "Off fucking this guy?" "Jesus, Evie." I held onto the bars for dear life. "Would you listen to me? We'll discuss this later. How are you? Are you hurt?" I asked, frightened for him, hoping he was okay. "Oh, like you'd care?" Asher asked, turning around. When he got to the far wall of his cell, which didn't take long, he slapped his hand against it. "This whole time we thought you'd be bringing home some real money, but instead you're out with some old dude? Gross, Evie." He practically snarled in Nick's direction. "Yeah, this old dude is saving your young, stupid ass," I yelled, no longer feeling like crying. He was really pissing me off. "Quicker that quick," he stormed toward me. "Yeah, there wouldn't have been any need to save my ass if you hadn't been out screwing some old man," he screamed right into my face. "You have no idea what you're talking about," I said, my voice quieter now, almost a warning. If there weren't bars between us, I swear I'd be strangling his neck right now. "Time's up," Nick said, pulling me away. "Len will meet you in court, Asher. Sit tight until your arraignment." "What the fuck else do you think I'm going to do?" he bellowed at Nick. But Nick didn't seem to give a crap. All he did was put his arm around my shoulders and walk me out. Our little conversation had woken up the other inhabitants. Catcalls and whistles were demeaning to say the least. I held on to Nick even tighter, trying not to let their vulgar words sink in too far. "Shut up, you assholes. She's my sister," I heard Asher shout out behind us. Even though he just acted like a real, genuine butthole himself, it made me feel better that he still had my back. That was how our family worked, so it wasn't a huge surprise. We could be mad as hell at each other. Like fighting mad. But if one of us was being attacked or needed help, they always had our support. "Don't listen," Nick whispered in my ear as he held me and rushed out the door. To Eve. Once we stepped outside, I took in large lungfuls of fresh air. It really had been stifling inside the holding cell area. Nick thanked Len first, then I did the same before he hurried off with promises of delivering Asher back home after his arraignment, which apparently might be at the end of the day but more likely tomorrow morning. "Let me drive you," Nick said, steering me in the opposite direction of my car. I dug my feet into the ground. No, I have to take my car home. I looked up into his face, again blown away by how handsome he was. I couldn't help but reach my fingers up and touch the stubble on his jawline. Thank you for all you've done. I don't know how much Len costs, but I'll pay you back. I said it. That didn't mean I meant it. I had an idea of what Len charged, and it would probably be decades before I'd have enough cash to pay Nick back. I don't want you to pay me back. Are you okay to drive? You were pretty upset when you left, he said, his fingertips grazing the side of my face and into my hair. I said, leaning into his touch. I was going to miss this. So much. Nick just being kind and protective. Yeah, I'm better now thanks to you, I said, faking a smile for him. I really need to get back home. Thanks again for your help. I don't know what we would have done without you, I said, meaning every word of that. We would have had to wait for some busy, overworked public defender to eventually show up and deal with this mess. Instead, Nick and his lawyer managed to come to the rescue. He leaned down and gave me a sweet kiss, making my lips tingle. Any time, he said in such a low, seductive voice it made my knees weak. This time, I grinned up at him with a genuine smile. I'm really sorry for how all of this ended. His hands slid down to my shoulders and squeezed. It's not your fault. In that moment, I got completely lost in his bright, sparkly eyes. It is my fault, and I'm really, really sorry we won't have our month together. He smirked down at me. Nope, not a month. Drive safe, Eve, he said in an almost happy tone. And for God's sakes, be careful. Then he kissed me again briefly before leaving. The whole way home, I cried constant tears. Yes, for Asher and the fact that he'd gone back to his old tricks to help the family. And gotten caught. But I also cried for me. I really wanted to spend the month with Nick, and I hadn't made it a week. I shook my head and wiped my tears away. Stop being such a baby, I whispered to myself, taking in a deep breath. Nothing good ever happens to you. This isn't a surprise. And wasn't that the damn truth? The one time in my life where I had a chance to escape reality for a time and it all went to hell. Now it was time to go back to reality. I sighed loudly and turned up the music on the radio, hoping for a distraction that never came. All too quickly, I pulled up and into my driveway. Welcome back to the shithole, I muttered to myself as I turned off the car and jumped out. I nearly went to grab my suitcase out of the back seat when I remembered I hadn't brought it. Nick had freaked out. Again. And I didn't want to stick around and discuss my family matters with him. I knew I had to take off immediately and get to Asher. There was nobody else who could help him. And talking over my shitty life with Nick was not something I was prepared to do. Clean break was always better than a messy one. But by Nick following me to the police station, he had made it a bit messier now. Plus, my suitcase and all my stuff were still at his place. I took another deep breath and slammed my car door. My feet dragged all the way to the house, delaying the inevitable. Opening the door, I smelled the familiar homey scents. Someone had a candle burning on the living room table. It was one of the pumpkin spice ones I'd picked up on sale last year. They'd been a steal, so I bought a ton of them. The fragrance of baby powder wafted up my nose. I peered down on the couch and saw a pile of the baby's clothes freshly laundered. I picked up a pink onesie and gave it a big sniff. Baby, I said to myself, loving the fresh, clean, perfect scent. Oh my gosh, you're home, Giselle said as she came down the stairs with a baby in a towel. How did everything go? She asked, her voice nearly quivering. I dropped the onesie back on the pile and reached out for the baby. Come to Annie Evie, I said in baby talk to Daniela. She peered over the edge of the towel and gave me a huge smile, which I returned. Then her arms and legs started to move erratically as she attempted to wiggle out of her mom's hold. Fine, hang on, Giselle said, trying to wrangle Danny and hand her over. I think you've grown since I saw you last, I said, pulling the squirming bundle from her mom's arms. You haven't even been gone a week. I gazed over at Giselle and smiled. Doesn't matter, she's definitely bigger. Aunties can tell these things, I said to Danny, making her squeal while she patted my head. I reached for a clean diaper from her bag, then snagged the pink onesie. How's Asher? She asked as I sat on the couch and laid baby Danny down beside me. He's grouchy and acting like an ass. So, nothing unusual? Giselle said sarcastically, and I snorted. That's the truth. How long are they holding him? She asked, stuffing the clean clothes into one of Danny's bags. I shrugged my shoulders and undid Danny's towel. If I didn't dress her soon, she'd need another bath. Hopefully he sees the judge today. If not, tomorrow for sure. I opened the diaper and slid it underneath Danny's tiny booty. A quiet knock sounded at the door. It's probably Mr. Howard wanting sugar and milk again, she said, moving toward the door. And she was right, it likely was. He showed up at least twice a week for both items. Or it could be one of the neighbors around us. We were all close on this block. If someone needed sugar or coffee or a shoulder to lean on, our door was always open, and so were theirs. Don't be so goofy, I said with a giggle, wrestling a twisting baby while I put on her diaper. Would you stop? I tickled her belly, then under her chin. She chortled and grabbed onto my hand, which completely melted my heart. Ah, you love me, right? I missed you, too. I crooned, finishing up with her diaper. I yanked her onesie on next, over top of her still wet hair. Or more like baby fuzz. She complained bitterly, but I managed. Sure, almost done, I said, sticking her pudgy hands through the armholes, one at a time, then kissing them. Look at this chub, I said, lightly pinching her belly before I did the snaps up on her onesie. Daniela laughed and kicked her legs. I picked her up and kissed her cheeks while I inhaled. You smell so good. Why do babies smell so good? Again, she laughed and hit my head with her hands. That made me start laughing, too. So I kept kissing her, making her chuckle even more. Eve, I heard my name called. I tried to look toward the door, but Danny had 2 handfuls of my hair in her tiny fists. But I knew that voice. It made my heart jump every time he said my name. Giselle came to my rescue, managing to get my hair out of Danny's fists with a minimum of pain. Oh, you stinker, she said when I was finally free. I gave the baby one last kiss before I handed her back to Giselle. I'll be right back, I said, looking into Giselle's surprised face as I stood. Are you okay? She whispered to me, widening her eyes and nodding toward the door. I gazed over to Nick. He had his mirrored sunglasses on, and he looked hot. Probably not. I sighed quietly and gave her arm a squeeze. Let's go outside, I said to him, barely acknowledging his presence while I slipped past him and out the door. As soon as I was in the middle of the yard, I turned around and said, What are you doing here? I crossed my arms and glared at him. How he figured out where I lived, I had not one idea. But he had to know that this crossed a line. Who's the father? Was all he said, hands on his hips like he was ready to fight. What are you talking about? I asked, putting my hands on my hips now. He pointed toward the house. The father. The baby's father, Eve, he snarled back at me. Why was he so mad? I don't know, I said, throwing my hands up in the air. Who cares? I shook my head, not knowing why he wanted to know who Danny's father was. You don't know? His eyebrows raised, then he ripped off his glasses. It's not that hard of a question, is it? He leaned in, squinting his eyes in an intimidating manner. Only I had no clue what he was doing that for. I've never even met him. Why are you asking me? I yelled at him, refusing to let him scare me. I'd done nothing wrong, but he sure had by showing up at my freaking house. His jaw dropped open. Obviously, you met him once. Now it was my turn to squint my eyes at him. No, I've never met him. Giselle told me he's a total douche and I believe her. Why the heck would I hunt down her baby daddy? Nick's face changed in an instant and he stepped closer to me. The baby's not, oh, for crying out loud, he thought Danny was mine. Now his temper tantrum made sense. Or did it? No, she's not mine, I said, cutting him off before he could say anything else that made me want to swat him. She's my neighbor, Giselle's. She's the one who was staying at my house while I was at yours. You don't have any kids? His voice was steady and low. I kicked the ball that was right beside my foot that one of my siblings must have left out. Nope, just 2 sisters and the prize of a brother you met earlier. I see, he said, running his hand through his thick hair as he lowered his head and walked around in a circle. All right, how old? He started to say when the front door of the house suddenly opened, and Rachel and Beatrice suddenly burst through it. Evie, they both screamed in unison, charging toward me. I opened my arms to them and they barged right into me. Hello to you too, I said, hugging them both tightly to me. They circled me with their arms so strongly I nearly fell. Hey, 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 girls, I said, touching their hair and kissing their foreheads one at a time. Everything's fine, I said, using my best soothing voice. No, it's not. Escher went off the rails again. We tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen, Ray said, finally looking up. He really wouldn't. We all tried, Bea said, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her sad little face made my heart break. You two are not responsible for Escher. He made his own decisions. Thank you for trying to talk him out of acting like an ass, though, I said, smiling at them, trying to make them feel better. They looked at each other and then Bea said, We wanted to call you, but you didn't answer your phone. Why didn't you answer? You said to call if we really, really needed you. Then my heart broke in half again. I looked over at Nick and then back to the girls. I'm sorry, I didn't hear it. I had a party to go to and I didn't look at it for a long time. I thought you were working? Bea said, quirking her head to the side, looking so sweet. Yeah, I was working, but not 24 hours a day. I got invited to a last-minute birthday party with someone I worked with, so I went. I hoped they'd take that horrible explanation and stop asking questions. Are you girls hungry? What time does school start? Nick asked, interrupting our family time, but I was grateful. The girls peered at Nick, then looked back to me unsurely. I smiled and said, That's Nick. Nick, this is Beatrice and Rachel. He smiled at them and shook their hands. Nice to meet you. Your sister has told me everything about you. He lied so well I nearly believed him. Who are you? Bea asked in a dreamy yet confused voice. Nick let out a small laugh and said, I'm your sister's boyfriend. Evie doesn't have a boyfriend, Ray said bluntly, not one to fall for things. She was the toughest of all my siblings to play a joke on. She does, but she didn't want to tell you guys about me until it was serious, Nick said, and I swear if the girls weren't in my way, I'd kick him. The girls didn't say anything. I was going to suggest I take you all out for breakfast before school. Their grips on me loosened. We're tired. We've been up for hours, so we'll probably stay home today to sleep instead, Ray said, her tone proving that she didn't trust Nick. Not a good idea, he said, shaking his head. You won't sleep. You'll just worry about your brother. And there's nothing you can do for him. I've got my lawyer on his case. He'll figure this out. You two will just fall behind in your classes, and that's not good. Get dressed, pack up your school bags, and we'll go for pancakes. BA's hands left me completely. Can we go to the pancake house? She asked, falling for exactly what Nick wanted. I looked down at her and smoothed out her hair. Evie, I'm seriously tired. I'm not going to school, Ray said, sounding more than ticked off now. She frowned at me with an angry look on her face. So, you go to school tired. Lots of kids there will be. Many adults show up to work tired, too. You get through the day, keep up with your classes, and go to bed early tonight. Now go get ready, he said, ordering her around. Time's running out. He twisted his wrist and pointed to his watch. That was all the encouragement Bee needed. She rushed off to the house like a bee was chasing her. Ray was slightly less excited. Evie, she said to me in a quiet voice, her eyes open wide. She was clearly annoyed. Go, honey, Nick's right. There's nothing to do. This will hardly be the first time you've gone to school tired. I smiled at her and kissed her cheek. I missed you, kid, I said, letting my arms engulf her and hug her tight. She let out a long huff, but she hugged me back. Hard. When she finally let go, she gazed over at Nick, then back to me. I could tell she wasn't buying that he was my boyfriend, and she wouldn't have to. But for now, this was the easiest way to explain his overbearing presence. After Ray shut the door behind her, I spun toward Nick. What was that all about? I'm taking you girls out for breakfast, he said, grabbing my hand in his. You know what I mean, I whisper-shouted at him, trying to get my hand out of his. He briefly gazed down at me and said, Go get ready for breakfast, Evie. He said my nickname with a particular emphasis. Then his lips touched mine before I knew what he was doing. Then he pulled me toward the house and told me I had 10 minutes to get ready. Took me 20. 3 Nick. It was worse than I'd thought. Their house was small and crowded. But all the houses in this area were old, but not old enough to blow over in the wind. But damn close. Thinking of Eve living in a place like this gave me a gut ache like I hadn't had in a long time. She deserved so much better than this shithole. So did her sisters. Her friend tagged along for breakfast at my insistence. She'd had a wary look on her face, and I could tell she didn't particularly care for me. Smart girl. The same was true of Eve's sister, Rachel. I guess she was 16 or close to it, and that kid didn't trust me as far as she could throw me. Smart kid. Beatrice, however, seemed to take a liking to me sheerly for the reason that I'd okayed the ginormous strawberry pancakes she wanted. She'd announced in the vehicle on the way over that she had just turned 10 years old last month. That kid was far too trusting. But I had to admit I enjoyed her openness. We'd have to work on that, though. For her own good. I'd ordered coffee and a side of eggs and bacon. Eve said she wasn't hungry, but I suggested it was likely going to be a long day and she needed to eat. Her friend, Giselle, the hot, stacked brunette, agreed with me, although somewhat reluctantly. I couldn't be sure without asking, but I'd bet she knew the true nature of my relationship with Eve. I found that interesting and wondered if I were in Eve's spot, if I'd have the nerve to tell anyone, especially someone I was close to, that I slept with strangers for money. How are your pancakes? I asked Beatrice. Her cute face smiled at me through a whipped cream haze. Good, she mumbled out as she chewed, then gave me a thumbs up. What about your pancakes, Rachel? Are they good as well? I asked, then took a sip of coffee. It wouldn't be my last cup, that I knew for sure. After staying up all night, plenty of caffeine would be needed today. Rachel glared up at me and said, they're pancakes? Her tone was what I imagined a typical teenager's to be. And since she was a teenager, I suppose it was normal. Annoying as hell. But normal. Rachel, Eve said, sounding irritated by her sister's attitude. Ow, Evie, Rachel said, moving her hand under the table. Why'd you kick me? Eve stared at her sister with what I could only describe as her evil eye. We can't have one meal without your mouth deciding to make an appearance? Rachel rolled her eyes and shook her head. My pancakes are the best in the whole world, Nick. How can we ever thank you for buying us breakfast? Her tone was robotic and so beyond sarcastic that I couldn't stop myself from laughing. Ow, damn it, Evie, stop it, Rachel said after Eve presumably kicked her again. That was me this time. Beatrice looked over at her sister with a huge smile on her face. Thanks, Bea, you saved me the trouble, Eve said with a smirk. You're welcome, Beatrice said, and that made us all laugh. Except for Rachel. Giselle started filling Eve in on some neighborhood gossip. The baby started banging her hands on the table, then in Giselle's plate. "Oh, for Pete's sakes," Giselle said, pushing her plate away and trying to wipe off the baby's hands. "Here, let me," Eve said, using her napkin and cleaning the tiny flailing fists. When she was satisfied, she scooped up the baby and said, "Let your mommy eat, you goof." Then she kissed Danny's fat little cheeks. The feeling that shot through me as I watched Eve with the baby I could not describe. I'd seen Eve with the baby when I first arrived at her house. But then my feeling was anger. I was more than ready to hunt down the asshole who'd gotten her pregnant. Just the thought of her having someone else's baby made me downright murderous. Why? I couldn't quite be sure. All I knew was that I wanted to pound in the face of the guy who'd impregnated Eve. The rush of relief when she told me the baby wasn't hers was enormous. Again, I didn't know why that mattered so much to me. "Say hi," Eve said, nudging me in the arm. I looked over and saw the baby staring at me while she sucked on her hand. "Hi," I said, smiling and lightly touching the side of her head. The baby drew in a loud breath and laughed. It was such a funny sound, all of us laughed along with her. "Ouch," Beatrice shrieked, and our heads turned to see that she'd cut her finger. "Why the heck are you using a steak knife to cut your pancakes?" Eve admonished her baby sister. "Here," she said, handing the baby over to me so quickly I didn't realize what was going on. Eve held her sister's cut finger, applying pressure with another napkin. "To the bathroom," she said, dragging her sister away. "Oh, I have Band-Aids," Giselle said, holding up her diaper bag and slinging it over her shoulder when she stood up. After she took a few steps away, she turned back to me and said, "Are you okay with her for a minute?" I nodded and lied, "Of course." Then she hurried off. The baby started to make gurgly noises as she continued sucking on her fists. "If I offer you $10, will you promise not to require a diaper change while I hold you?" Rachel snorted despite herself. "Don't have much experience with babies?" she asked, picking up her orange juice and taking a large sip. "Nope. You're pretty old. Don't you have any kids yet?" I stared at her and gave her the same answer. "Nope." How weird. Most people have kids by the time they're your age. She had a slight grin on her face. "Why don't you have any?" "Not in the cards, I suppose," I said, pushing away my coffee and plate so they didn't suffer the same fate from the baby's hands. I turned her around and let her sit on my lap while she slapped her hands on the table. "Well, Evie wants a bunch. So I guess you guys aren't meant to be after all. She loves babies and has always said how she can't wait to have a family. I guess she'll have to find another guy who'll give her one." I felt a stabbing sensation through my stomach. I knew that Rachel was trying to piss me off, anger me, and scare me away. In her situation, I'd do the same thing. Except this was Eve we were talking about, and nobody was going to start a family with her. "You're probably too old to have kids anyway." Rachel dug in one more jab. Instead of getting angry, I decided to laugh at her ridiculous claim. "I'm not quite that old." She took another bite of her pancakes, swallowed, and asked, "Are you really my sister's boyfriend?" I answered her back, "Yes." Her eyes scanned my face. "What if I told you I think you're full of shit?" My eyes didn't leave hers. "Then I'd say you were an extremely smart young woman. You should always be cautious of people you don't know. And the fact that you're so protective of your sister only says good things about you." Her face went blank before she went back to her pancakes. Then I continued bargaining with the baby. For Eve, Nick had insisted on driving us to the pancake house. Giselle had taken her own car. We dropped off Beatrice at the elementary school, then Rachel at high school. After that, I used my phone to call the school and tell them that Asher was sick and wouldn't be in today and maybe not tomorrow either. They didn't give me any grief, so at least that was one thing to be thankful for. When Nick drove in behind my car on the driveway, I undid my seatbelt and turned to him. "Thank you for your help with Asher. And for taking everyone out for breakfast. It made a shitty day less shitty," I said, placing my hand on his arm. I really was grateful that he'd been there for me, for us. I was already missing him, and he wasn't even gone yet. You're welcome. I'm glad I could help. His sparkling eyes gazed into mine, and I couldn't help but lean forward and kiss him. He accepted the kiss more than willingly, setting his hands on my face and cupping it gently. He teased my lips with his tongue, and I opened for him, wanting to feel him kiss me deeply one more time before he left. My tongue touched his and I groaned. Then he let out a sexy sigh as he kissed me harder. I let my hands find his shoulders, then traveled up into his thick, soft hair. I pulled it a bit roughly between my fingers, loving the feel. Through a few minutes, I finally pulled away, both of us breathless after that goodbye kiss. Thanks, Nick, I said, feeling tears creep up behind my eyes. I needed to get out of the car before I started crying. I opened my door and slid out, not looking back. Because if I did, I knew I'd run straight into his arms and beg him not to go. I pulled the keys out of my purse and found the right one for the door. When I stuck it in and twisted, I sniffled a bit, thinking what a raw deal this was. What I wouldn't give to spend the rest of the month at Nick's place and not have to deal with real life. I shut the door behind me, but for some reason it didn't close. What the? I said, spinning around and getting the fright of my life. My hand went straight to my chest and I hollered, "Why are you? Oh my gosh, you scared me to death." Nick simply set his hand on my hip and pushed me forward while he walked into my house. "Nick, what are you doing?" I shouted, frowning at him as he shut and locked the door. "I'm coming inside, Miss Hayward." "What do you think I'm doing?" he asked, his voice sounding exasperated with me. My heart gave a sudden twist when he'd said my last name for the first time. "You dropped me off." "I thanked you." "This," I said, moving my hand back and forth between us, "is over. We are done. I'll give you your money back." His face changed back to menacing, and he stormed toward me so quickly I had no choice but to back up. Once I hit the wall and couldn't move anymore, he caged me in with his body. "We are not done until I say we're done." I somehow lost every bit of air in my lungs after I said, "Nick, this is over." "It's not fucking over," he grunted out before his lips crashed down onto mine. Oh man, I was equal parts disturbed and relieved. Disturbed because our agreement was officially over. We should not be doing this. And relieved because I craved him like this, angry, aggressive, and starving. For me. I loved when he took over and I didn't have to think about what to do next. His control took away my power, but I gave it away gladly. Nick knew what he wanted, and whatever he wanted he took. I kissed him back just as hungrily, wanting him to make me forget the hours that had transpired since I'd woken up alone in his bed. Before the shitty day began, when we were still basking in his birthday celebration, his hands pulled me closer to him. "Does anyone else live here?" he asked quietly into my ear. I shook my head. "No, nobody. We're alone for the foreseeable future?" I nodded. "Yes." "Then show me where your room is. I had plans for us before you left my bed this morning." His warm lips kissed my cheek before he pulled away and grabbed my hand. My entire body shivered at his words and the lustful tone of his voice. I'd be lying if I said I didn't want to sleep with him. A steady ache had set up between my legs, and I'd love for Nick to help me with that. So I led him up the stairs into my room. He slammed the door behind him, making me jump at the noise. "Clothes off, Eve," he said in his seductive voice that always made me want to do anything he desired. I started with my top, slipping my fingers under the hem and pulling it up and over my head. I decided not to take any of the clothes that Nick had bought for me, except for this bra and panty set. I figured he wouldn't notice anyway, and it was my favorite of all the underwear he'd gotten me. The white bra was supportive yet risque. The best of both worlds. I loved the bra so much because the demi-cups made me feel so voluptuous and racy. I could feel my nipples begin to harden as I undid my shorts and slid them down my legs. "Fucking beautiful," he muttered, his eyes stuck to my chest. It excited me even more to know I affected him like this. His mouth practically hung open, and I smiled. I undid my bra, sad to see it go, but also happy for what was going to happen next. When my thong hit the floor, Nick said, "On the bed." I nodded my head and made my way over to the bed. Pulling back the covers, I felt myself clench tightly down below. A delicious anticipation set up, making my mouth dry. After I climbed onto the bed, I noticed Nick was slowly unbuttoning his shirt. "You ever fuck anyone in that bed?" His head jerked toward me as his tongue licked his bottom lip. Man, that was hot. When his shirt was finally open, I stared at his perfectly tanned, muscular chest. He really could be a model for the Greek statues in the museum. "Answer me, Eve," he said, pulling his shirt off the rest of the way. I had to think about what he'd asked me because watching him had cleared my mind of everything. "No," I answered, telling him the truth. I'd never even had a boy in my room before. Well, one who wasn't family. His eyebrows raised a bit, like he thought I was lying. "Never?" "Come on," he said. His voice was low and sexy, and I swear I could feel his words make my body tingle. I shook my head slightly, not taking my eyes off him. "Never." He took off his shoes and socks, then his slacks fell to the floor. "So, this will be the first time you get fucked in your bed?" I could feel a rush of wetness escape. The anticipation was killing me. "Yes," I answered in a near-breathy moan, thinking about how Nick was soon going to be inside me, fucking me on my bed. And I couldn't wait. "Open your legs for me, please," he said, and I nearly rolled my eyes back in my head. I did what he asked and watched a devilish smile cross his face. "That's so beautiful. I love how well you listen." He dug his knee into the bed and my body rolled a bit in his direction because I had the crappiest mattress known to mankind. A loud squeaking noise sounded with every move he made. When he was over top of me, his eyes roamed my face and down to the rest of my body. My nipples tightened without him doing anything at all. "I wanted to take my time with you, but knowing that you've never had sex in your bed before has changed things. I need to be inside you," he said, lowering his body to mine as his mouth gently touched mine. "Now." I wrapped my arms around him and licked his bottom lip. "Yes, please," I said, wrapping my legs around his hips, urging him to enter me. "I'm aching for you, Nick." His lips landed on mine, harder this time, and his tongue plunged into my mouth at nearly the same time his cock invaded my soaking wet pussy. I let out a loud gasp, then moaned while he plunged all the way inside. He didn't start off easy. His hips thrust forward, pumping his cock in and out of me at a near-frenzied pace. Nick never started like this, and it turned me on so much. I could feel more wetness trickle from me. My bed and mattress creaked insanely with every movement he made, but neither of us seemed to care. "I love you, Nick," I said, my fingernails digging into his back, trying to find purchase. "Are you coming?" he asked into my ear, making me shiver. "Not yet," I said, arching my back to press my breasts closer to his chest. I loved how the spattering of his chest hair felt against my nipples. Then I realized why he asked if I was coming. He only asked me to say, "I love you," when I came. And that was the only time he ever said it as well. I decided not to think about that right now. "Fuck me harder, honey," I pleaded with him, holding his hips in a tighter grip with my legs. I ground my pelvis against his in the steady, punishing rhythm. Finally, I felt the familiar sensation coil inside me. "I'm coming, Nick. Oh my God, I'm coming." "I love you, love you," I said while he escalated his pace. I don't think he ever fucked me that hard before, and I loved every second of it. His hips burst forward one last, rough time before he stilled. "I love you, Eve." "Fuck, I love you," he said, kissing me between long, loud gasps. I felt him explode inside of my pussy, causing even more wetness to drip from me. We held each other tight and kissed for a long while until our breathing settled. "Your bed's really fucking noisy. Is that why you haven't fucked in here?" Nick asked with a huge smile on his face. I wiped the sweat on his forehead with my fingertips. Partially, I said, laughing, letting my lips touch his wet, salty cheek. Well, since nobody's home, I suggest you turn over on your hands and knees. I want to fuck you a few more times while we're alone, he said, giving me a delicious, deep kiss before he sat back on his legs. My eyes raked his glistening body. I just couldn't get enough. Eve, roll over for me, please, he asked, encouraging me with his hands. I did exactly what he said, and we thoroughly enjoyed the rest of the morning. 5 Eve. Well, it sure sounded like you had a good morning, Giselle said, teasing me as she packed up the rest of her stuff. I called her over a couple hours after Nick left. I'd intended to call her right away, but I napped before I jumped into the shower. Nick had been especially active. Not that I minded. I loved how my muscles twinged, reminding me how they'd been overworked. You could hear us from your house? I asked with a frown while I folded a basket of laundry. I think the whole neighborhood could hear. She smirked and shimmied her hips. But I used my key and came in near the end of the first half, she said, waggling her eyebrows in a ridiculous manner. I laughed and swatted her with the end of a towel. I didn't know he was coming inside. I'd said goodbye to him in the car. And then before I knew it, he was slamming the door shut behind me. I shrugged and finished folding the towel. I saw his car leave after lunch. How'd you guys leave things? My heart sank. I made us tomato soup and sandwiches. Then he kissed the crap out of me before he ran off to work. His kiss had held so much emotion, my eyes had gotten teary. A real goodbye kiss. So, he's picking you up later or what? She asked, staring right at me with her mouth slightly open. I shook my head. Nope, we're done. It's time to get back to real life. Actually, I said, pulling my phone off the coffee table, I have to figure out how much to refund him. He paid me for the first week, but I didn't stay for that long. After plugging in a few numbers, I came up with what I thought was a fair number. I wouldn't charge him for today since I was only there for the first 5 hours. Even though he'd woken me up a few times during those hours, it wasn't fair to him to pay for the other 19 hours I was a burden on him. Considering the amount he was paying the lawyer, I should probably return the whole shebang back to him. Crap. I really needed that money. Really needed that money. Part of it was going toward the house taxes that I'd already flagged it for. The reason that Asher did what he did. I should have told him that being late with the taxes wasn't that big of a deal. I was going to pay it, I'd just gotten caught up with Nick's birthday surprise. And now the big dummy was in jail because of it. I texted Nick. I'm returning the amount you paid. I know it won't make a dent in what I'll owe you for the lawyer, but at least it's something. I sent the text and set my phone on the table. Are you sure he doesn't want to continue with the month? Even after what happened? I pursed my lips together, then spoke. I have to deal with Asher. It's over. We're done. He did not sound like a man who was done, she said, raising her eyebrows far too high on her forehead. Is there anything left of your bed? Because half of me expects to see a big old pile of dust up there where your mattress used to be. That cracked me up too much. My shoulders bounced and I let my head fall back. Okay, you might be right about that poor mattress. We gave it quite the workout. My phone vibrated on the table and I picked it up. It was from Nick. Can we discuss this later? I'm in a meeting. Yeah, there was nothing to discuss. And hearing his voice on the phone was only going to make me sadder. So I went into my banking app and refunded him nearly the full amount. My guts hurt when I pressed send. All that money. Crap. Still, I'd had the most fun with Nick than I'd had ever in my whole life. Even though we'd only had a short time together, it broke my heart to have it end. I set my phone down again and Giselle and I chatted for a while until we finished the folding. Then I noticed an email notification pop up on my screen from my bank. It said that Nick had declined my electronic transfer. I opened up my email and read it more closely. As I was reading the first email, another one came in. It was from Nick. He'd sent the remaining 3 weeks of money, and it was instantly deposited into my account. "Oh my gosh," I whispered to myself as my heart started beating faster. My palms were sweating as I messaged him back immediately. "Why did you do that? You don't need to pay me for the rest of the month. What are you doing?" I sent to him in total shock. I'd never had that kind of money in my account before. Then I went back into my banking app and shipped that hefty amount directly to him. "I'm in a meeting. We'll talk about this later," he texted, making my blood start to boil. We weren't going to discuss anything later. While I was thinking of what to say, I received another email saying Nick had declined my electronic transfer. Again. "I'm going to kill him," I muttered, staring at the email, not believing what it said. "What's going on? You're as white as a ghost." I looked over at Giselle. "He just paid me for the rest of the month." Giselle's mouth gaped open. "No way." Then she quickly recovered. "See? I told you he was not done with you yet." She smiled at me and did a cute little wiggle on the couch. "You should go back to his place. I'll call you when Asher gets here. There's nothing you can do in the meantime anyway, except make some money." Then she flopped back against the seat of the couch, arms above her head, eyes closed. Her hips made obscene gyrating movements as she moaned, "Oh, Nick, yes! Harder, Nick! Oh my God, Nick!" The springs in the old couch squeaked during her performance, not as loudly as my bed, of course, but still noisy. "Shut up, you perv," I said, laughing at her. That only made her do it louder, so I threw a pillow at her head. She still wouldn't stop. The only thing that made her quit was when Daniela started crying. "See? Now you've woken your daughter," I said, standing up and smiling down at her. "Let me grab her." I didn't give her time to protest. She was in her car seat, so I undid the straps and pulled her out. "Did you have a good sleep?" "Ah," I said, watching her rub her eyes with her chubby fists. "I'm serious. You should go to Nick's. He obviously wants you to keep staying with him," Giselle said, reaching up for the baby. I quickly turned and held Danny closer to me. "It's not a good idea. Even if he does still want me. Evie, there's nothing you can do for Asher. Go have fun and earn some cash. Win-win." I took in a deep breath and gazed down at her. Even if that's the case, it's still not a good idea. Her face screwed up in confusion. "Why the heck not? I don't see a problem here." Then I leveled with her and told her something I didn't want to admit to myself. I think I'm falling for him." The frown melted right off her face, and it was replaced with a sad, sorrowful look. "Oh no, Evie," she said, nodding. It was difficult to know that expression of pity was solely for me. "Oh yes." Felt good to say it out loud. No matter how awful and conflicted I was inside, admitting how stupid I was being made me a tiny bit lighter. I know I'm dumb. And I also know a guy like Nick would never in a billion years fall for someone like me. I can't help how I feel, though. Her face brightened a little. "You never know. Stranger things have happened," she said, a small smile on her face. Gosh, she really was a great friend. "I'm not living in an 80s movie," I sighed, holding the baby closer. I inhaled her baby scent and it calmed me somewhat. "Maybe you are? You've watched them all enough times," she said with a note of sarcasm, and it made me giggle. "Yeah, Giselle. Maybe I am. But probably not. No hot billionaire is going to come and rescue me from the street corner." She stood up and walked over to me, then wrapped her arms around both me and the baby. "You never know. Maybe he already did." Her hugs were the best. I decided to stop thinking about hot billionaires and get on with the afternoon. 6, Nick. "We really need you up here, boss," one of my lackeys said into the phone. "Something ain't right. Oh, for fuck's sakes." The last thing in the world I needed right now was to have to deal with incompetent idiots. "I'm busy. Can't you take care of it?" I asked, my voice sounding whiny even to me. I couldn't help it, though. I was on my way to Eve's and I didn't want to waste time on shit these idiots were paid to handle. I got a bad feeling, he said in a grating voice. And you ain't been around for days. It's like you dropped off the face of the earth. Now that annoyed me. I hadn't been gone for days. Perhaps I was more preoccupied than normal. But that I was allowed. Fine, I'll be there in 10 minutes, I said before hanging up. The fact that I had to make a detour really pissed me off. Especially to where I had to go. Not my favorite place. Where I wanted to be was with the argumentative, impossibly beautiful Eve. Damn, I loved her name. I grinned wide as I thought about how I'd nailed her all morning in that old squeaky bed of hers. I don't know what it was besides the fact that she'd never been fucked in it before. Well, and the fact that Eve was naked in that bed. When she'd left in such a rush this morning, I was furious. To say the least. Our deal was a month, and I'd expected her to abide by it. I hadn't known her brother had been arrested. And she sure hadn't told me. Which really pissed me off. Had she said something, I could have handled it with one calm, quick phone call. All done from the comfort of my office. Instead, she flew off the handle and out my door into the not quite dawn. Thank goodness I'd thought to put a tracking device on her car. That made it pretty easy to find out where she was. Seeing her in that kind of distress brought up more feelings inside of me that I was certain I'd never felt before. All I wanted to do was help her and make her happy again. Anything to make her happy. Coming to her rescue gave me a nice, warm feeling in my chest. She was completely broken. And I was able to help. She felt indebted to me now, which didn't sadden me in the least. I liked having her need me like that. Gaze up at me as though I'd saved her whole world. I had no idea why she wanted to bail that moron of a brother of hers out of jail. If he were my sibling, I'd leave him there to rot. But she did love him. God knows why. The only good part of that situation had been following her back to her house. Seeing where she lived, meeting her sisters and her friend, filled in so many of the pieces I'd been waiting for. Her house was a piece of shit. So was her bed. These were all things I could help her out with. I smiled to myself thinking about how much more she was about to need me. Unfortunately, that smile didn't last long once I parked and got out of my car. I huffed as I slammed my door and made my way into the warehouse. Once they let me in, I looked around the dark interior until I saw a bright light. In front of that light, I could make out someone sitting in a chair with a few of my guys standing around. "Is this what I pay you for?" I asked, making their heads turn to me. The man in the chair was tied up, duct tape across his mouth. "This is the third guy we've caught in as many days, boss. Nosing around where he don't belong," my guy said, nodding toward their hostage. "All of us Castanedas," he said, wiping his nose on his arm. "Lovely. On both counts." I'd already figured out this one was from Castaneda's camp. If there was one thing I was good at sniffing out, it was his followers. I meandered over to the tied-up man and ripped off his duct tape, making him shout. I nearly laughed out loud. "Why are you snooping around? Did someone send you?" I asked, dropping the piece of duct tape on the dusty floor. No, I swear, man. I just got lost." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean any harm," he said with terror in his eyes. The other thing I could sniff out was bullshit. And this guy was covered in it. I grabbed a handful of hair on the back of his head and jerked it back. "I'm going to ask you one more time," I said in a dead serious voice. He let out another yelp. I loved the control I had over him right now, even if I hated the reason for it. Think hard. Why were you snooping around my turf? And I want the right answer this time. "I wasn't. I went out for a walk and got lost, that's it," the guy screamed when I yanked his head harder. "Wrong answer, asshole," I said, shoving his head so hard his chair tipped over. "Get rid of him. And send a message this time," I told my guys in no uncertain terms. They knew what that meant. I turned to go, and I'd almost made it to the door before one of them said, Boss, don't you think we should have a meeting about this? Something's going on. Fuck. I did not want to do that. I wanted to get over to Eve's place. Now. Call Mario. Get him to do some listening and let me know what he says, I said over my shoulder. I'm late, I don't have time for this right now. With that, I slammed the door and strode to my car. Just as I was slipping inside, I heard the single gunshot. I don't know what's for supper. Would you give me a minute to answer the door? I heard Eve shout. I smiled and let out a short laugh. I had the answer to her next problem. When the door swung open, her jaw dropped. Nick, what are you? Oh, yes, thank you. Rachel shouted from across the room, running in our direction. I'm starving and there's no food in the house. Again. Eve frowned at her sister and said, There is so, you just need to be inventive. Rachel rolled her eyes and divested me of the 2 bags in my arms. I refused to eat mushroom soup for supper again this week. She peered briefly at me and nearly smiled. Then she raced off toward the kitchen. Why are you here? Eve asked in a hushed tone for only me to hear. I so wanted to lean down and kiss her. After I'd left here, my day was complete shit. All I wanted to do was eat and spend the evening with her. But first, I kissed her. She acted surprised when my lips touched hers. Soon she cooperated fully. Now, all I wanted to do was take her up to her room again. Except there was the small issue of her family being here. And her small, creaky bed. I ended the kiss and said, Let's eat. Then I grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the kitchen. The girls were already diving into the bags, unpacking all the boxes. It smells so good, Beatrice said, inhaling deeply over a steaming order of beef and broccoli. Her face was completely serene. It nearly made me laugh. It would be nice if you 2 didn't act like animals when we have a guest over, sheesh, Eve said, shaking her head. She let go of my hand and walked over to the cupboards. I watched her pull out plates and cutlery, then carry them to the table. She handed me a plate. Thank you, I said and sat down. Everyone passed around the boxes of Chinese food and took what they wanted. Beatrice spoke non-stop about her day at school, with Rachel chiming in to give her opinion on nearly everything. Eve, however, had been quiet, not saying much of anything, and not meeting my eyes. I decided to eat first and deal with whatever was bothering her later. My afternoon had been busy, so I hadn't eaten or had so much as a coffee since I'd left here at 1 o'clock. When we heard a knock on the door, Eve got up to see who it was. She'd showered and changed since I'd seen her last. I knew this because I'd left her naked and sweaty in her bed. And now her hair was straightened and she had makeup on. All she wore were tight jean shorts and an off-the-shoulder top, but my cock took notice as she moved to the door. Hi, you hungry? Nick brought Chinese food, she said, letting Giselle and the baby in. No way, she squealed, bouncing baby Daniela in her arms. You know I'm always in for Chinese. Giselle practically bounded to the table, and I quickly took my last few bites. Hi, Giselle, I said, wiping my mouth with the napkins the restaurant had provided. Nice to see you 2 again. She looked at me and this time gave me a genuine smile. She'd smiled at me this morning at breakfast, but I could tell she was faking it. But right now, she was definitely happy to see me. Hi, Nick. Thanks for the food. I haven't had Chinese in ages. Then she hurried to the cupboard and grabbed a plate and a fork. When she sat down, baby Daniela had other ideas than allowing her mommy to eat. Danny wanted to bang on the plate and have fun. Stop, you goof, Eve said, setting her fork on her plate. Come to Annie, I'm almost done. I stopped her from getting up. Let me, I'm already finished, I said, rising up and walking toward the little meal disturber. May I? We became fast friends at breakfast. I held out my hands and Giselle gladly shoved her into my arms. You bet, thanks, she said quickly, then began scooping out food onto her plate. I smelled the top of the baby's head. I'd never held an infant before, so I had no idea how different they smelled compared to adults. Or maybe it was just Daniela. At any rate, she really was sweet. There was a hint of baby powder, but I didn't know what else, perhaps detergent? I had no idea. I walked around with her in my arms, sometimes holding her facing me, other times facing the world. She appeared to enjoy both, but not for long. So I had to keep moving and guessing what she wanted. When she got tired of one position, she'd begin to squirm and fuss. Then I'd switch something and she'd be happy for a little while again. I heard my phone go off in my pocket, so I held Daniela close while I answered. "Yeah," I said into the phone. "A delivery for Mr. Rossetti," the man on the other end of the phone said. "Perfect, I'll open the door." I clicked off my phone and carried the baby with me. When I opened the door, I spotted a woman coming up the lawn with a clipboard. "You're Rossetti?" she asked unceremoniously, shoving the board at me. Pen was stuck on the side. I reached out for the clipboard, then soon realized I was out of hands. "Yes, do you think you could assist?" "My partner hasn't learned to write yet," I said, making the woman laugh. She pulled the board from me and unhooked the pen. "No problem." "And how are you today?" she asked Daniela in a high-pitched voice while she handed me the pen. I quickly signed and said, "She's intent on ruining her mother's supper. Otherwise, things are going quite well." I returned the pen and the woman asked for instructions, which I gave her immediately. "Who's that?" Eve said, coming up behind us just as the woman turned to go back to the truck. I walked back into the kitchen instead of answering. "Girls, I ordered you all new beds. Can you please take the sheets off your old beds and tell the movers where to put your new ones? And do Asher's bed too, will you?" I instructed. After they displayed a short look of shock on their faces, they both dropped their cutlery and raced upstairs. "What did you do?" Eve asked with a tone of exasperation. "They don't need new beds." I raised my eyebrows at her and lowered my chin. "After this afternoon, I'd say you definitely need a new bed." I heard Giselle let out a strangled laugh. "And I can't just buy you one and nobody else now, can I?" Eve's mouth opened, but she remained silent. The movers started coming in with the beds. Rachel and Beatrice were so excited it was a joy to watch. After a while, Giselle finished eating and took a very fussy Daniela away from me. Then she sat down on the couch and breastfed the baby, which quieted her down in an instant. I'd seen women on television feed their babies, but I couldn't remember ever seeing that in person. It really was a truly beautiful sight, how the baby gazed up into her mother's eyes and vice versa. Giselle held Daniela's little hand with hers and talked in a low, loving voice. "Bedroom furniture, too?" Eve yelled, throwing her hands up. "Are you kidding me?" She turned to me, her mouth wide open. "Well, they come as a matching set. What did you expect me to do?" I answered, trying to make it sound as logical as possible. Eve rolled those beautiful eyes of hers again. "They do not. Beds are one thing, but new furniture is something completely different. That's too much. We can't accept it." The girls were on the top of the stairs, hearing all of this. "What?" "No, please, we want the nice new stuff," Beatrice shouted, nearly in tears. "Yeah, it's a gift. Why can't Nick give us a gift? He's your boyfriend, right?" Rachel said, narrowing her eyes on her older sister. Eve let out a loud huff. "Because this is way too much money for him to spend on us. And we already have perfectly good bedroom furniture." "It's crap that Mom and Dad found in the back alley," Rachel stated, glaring even harder at Eve now. "Ugh, you're all driving me crazy," Eve said, then rushed out the front door right before another dresser was being carried in. I looked down at Giselle, still feeding the baby. Daniela seemed completely oblivious to the goings-on around her. "Should I go after her?" I asked, completely stumped. I really wasn't sure what I should do right now. She grinned up at me and said, "Nah, give her a minute to cool down. She'll be right back." I nodded but kept looking out the front door anyway. "Nick," Giselle said from the couch. I glanced down. This is all really nice of you. She's just overwhelmed right now. Nobody takes care of her. Eve does everything for everyone, but nobody ever helps her. Ever. I could see Giselle's eyes start to get glassy. She meant what she said about her friend. It was obvious how much she loved Eve. And knowing that nobody in the world had Eve's back made me more than angry. She deserved everything. The baby was asleep, and Giselle and I had cleaned up and put the leftovers away. Rachel and Beatrice worked like horses to move their things from the old dressers to the new. They helped each other out, and I thought that was a nice thing to see. Nobody had to instruct them to do it. They just did it and worked until they were all moved in. I gotten hugs from Beatrice and a genuine, "Thanks, Nick. That was really cool of you," from Rachel. I counted that as a win. Giselle got after them to finish their homework, and that was what they'd been doing, hopefully, for the last hour in their rooms. There was still no sign of Eve. Should I go look for her? I asked again, not paying attention to the annoying reality show that Giselle had on. She yawned and looked over at me. She'll be fine. I'm going to tell the girls to shower and go to bed. Then Danny and I'll take off. Thanks for the supper, she said, standing up, and the entertainment. Giselle laughed to herself the whole way up the stairs. An hour after Giselle left, I heard a key in the front door, and it opened. Eve walked in, not gazing in my direction. She chucked her keys on the side table and stormed up the stairs. A door slammed, and I heard the water go on. I settled back into the couch and finished watching the news. Once the water stopped, I heard a door open, then another one slam shut. I turned off the TV and went upstairs to shower. There wasn't much for towels, but I grabbed a fairly threadbare one and headed out the door to Eve's room. A faint light shone under her door. The girls' rooms down the hall were dark and quiet. I carefully opened Eve's door and saw her sitting up, reading. She didn't comment as I wandered around to the side of the bed and slid in. "I don't remember inviting you for a sleepover," she said, her voice low with a tinge of meanness to it. She still didn't look at me. "That's okay, I invited myself," I said, feeling a smile form on my lips. "I think it's best if you leave now." The smile dropped off my face. I pulled the book out of her hands, chucked it to the floor, and yanked her down beside me. "Hey, what are you doing?" she said in a whispered yell. "I was reading that. We need to talk," I said, looking down into her angry eyes. Her eyes widened and she said, "Oh, now we need to talk? What about when you were ordering thousands of dollars worth of furniture? Did we not need to talk then?" She tried to push me away with her hands, but I held her close to me. "No," I stated very firmly with no other comment. "No? No? Are you crazy?" she asked sarcastically, trying to move away from me. "No. If I see that you need something, I'm going to get it for you. In case you haven't noticed, Eve," I said, taking her hands in mine and rolling her until my body was on top of hers, "I'm not the kind of guy who asks for permission." Then I let my lips touch the side of her neck, and I inhaled her vanilla scent. I kissed the sensitive skin there and watched her shiver. "You need to leave," she said again, but much less convincing this time. "I like it here," I said into her neck, kissing my way down her chest to her nipple. It was already hard and poking up under her thin shirt. "You should go," she said with a small gasp right before I placed my lips around her tight bud. "No, thanks. I'm going to stay." I let my tongue flick at her for a moment before I lifted her shirt and bared her breasts. My hand rested on her breast, feeling her incredible softness. Eve's eyes closed and her legs opened wider beneath me. My body relaxed into hers and I slid inside slowly, taking my time. I'd missed her and I wanted to show her how much. It wasn't long before we both came, which relieved me in more than one way. After she turned her new bedside lamp off, she laid on my chest and said, "Thanks, Nick, for everything." A few minutes later, she was out cold. And so was I. 7 Eve. "And he had a bunch of groceries delivered too," Giselle said, pointing her spoon at me while she ate her second bowl of cereal. Yeah, I know. He spent way too much on us, I said, feeling more than guilty for everything Nick had bought for us. The new bedroom sets were far too extravagant, but I have to say our rooms really looked nice now. Of course, the furniture was way nicer than our actual rooms. Quality of that merchandise didn't belong in this neighborhood. Not even close. Nick had made it abundantly clear he wasn't about to return any of it, though. And it wasn't as if I had the means to take it back. The groceries were appreciated. Through our morning tryst yesterday and my nap, it didn't leave much time or desire for grocery shopping. He didn't seem to mind doing any of it. For you, Giselle said, smiling across the table at me. I shrugged and drank my coffee. It's too much, I said, feeling the weight of everything I couldn't give to my family. Your bed was horrible. So were the others. I set my cup down. Well, they've been good enough for a long time. And they would have held up longer, I said, sounding as grouchy as I felt. The beds were awful, but it wasn't like we were sleeping in a cardboard box or something. Not after the beating yours took yesterday. She giggled, picking up the bowl and drinking the leftover milk. I sighed, my mind floating around with 100 things I had to do. And none of it was any fun. Except for Asher hopefully coming home today. When 5 o'clock had come and gone yesterday, we all knew it would be another day at least until he was home. That probably added to my crappy mood last night. Why do I seem more excited about your new relationship than you do? She frowned, sitting back in her chair. You're younger than me, but you should still know this won't last. Do you really think a guy like Nick will want to hang out with a girl like me? I'm surprised he didn't go running off once he saw this house. I nodded to the living room. Giselle frowned at me. It didn't seem to bother him at all. He was really helpful with the baby. And he and I cleaned the kitchen while you were gone, too. I took another sip of my coffee but didn't say anything to that. Giselle was nice. And she was also naive. She lowered her voice and stretched her hand across the table. It landed on mine. He was really worried. I swear he asked me every 15 minutes if he should go after you. Her other hand landed on her heart. It was so sweet. Her eyes looked so dreamy and hopeful. Gosh, I really wished I could be like that. Had I ever been like that? He overstepped. I don't know what he was thinking. But anyway, I don't have time to rehash all the things wrong with last night. I need to figure out bail, I said, leaning my elbow on the table. No matter what I tried, I couldn't let go of this horrible sense of dread. Just when life seemed to ease up, bam, I'd get hit even harder. Giselle tilted her head slightly. Nick will pay, I'm sure. I let out a long sigh. Asher is not his responsibility. He's mine. And besides, I need bail for more than just him. You know that. My stomach twisted and I felt bile rise in my throat. I knew what I had to do, but that didn't mean I wanted to do it. No, 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 she whispered, a clear look of shock on her face. None of that is your problem. Don't you dare spend 1 red cent on those people. I have to. I wanted to cry and scream and curse the world for being so unfair. But what would that accomplish? Absolutely nothing. I already knew this from the many crying jags I'd had in the last few months. No, you don't. You're doing enough. Leave them be, she said, her eyes getting slightly teary as she spoke. I shook my head and said, I need to get back to work. Again, my stomach roiled, knowing what I had to do. What? She squeaked, letting go of my hand. Nick already paid you. What are you talking about? Even if I do keep it, which I won't, that money will run out eventually. What am I supposed to do to feed everyone and keep the lights on? Now my eyes were starting to tear up. Gosh, I hated acting like a big baby. I was an adult and I needed to act like one. I keep saying this, but why don't you call Louise? I know she'll be glad to help you guys out. I can't understand why you haven't already called her, she said, her eyebrows raised and voice haughty. She was right. My best friend Louise was definitely the type to drop everything and come help us. But there was no way I was calling. It was enough that Louise helped me get a job at Alona's. I wasn't going to ask for anything else. You know why, Giselle, I whispered and pursed my lips for a moment. She got out. You don't call people who got out to come back. You rejoice that they got a ride out and pray the same will happen for you one day. Her eyes rolled back as she stood up. You are crazy. Louise loves you. She'd do anything for you. I still need to go back to work, I said, telling her the truth she already knew. You hardly make any money at that bar. What's that going to pay for? She said, talking about the bar where I picked up a shift or two a week. It wasn't great pay because that place was never busy, which also meant the tips were crappy. But it worked as a great cover when I took a job at Alona's. Nobody questioned me working late into the night. I'm not talking about at the bar, I said, staring at her as she gazed down at me. Her face dropped. No, Eve, you can't. It's my job. Cherry, the older man asked when he opened the door. His hair was completely white, and I'd put him in his late 50s if I had to guess. It looked like he took care of himself. He didn't have much of a paunch or anything. And his smile looked kind. Yes, Javier? I asked before stepping into the hotel room. His cologne was pretty overpowering, but that wasn't anything new. I found a lot of guys overindulged in that stuff, especially if they were new to the company. I did what I always did and shut my mind off. It wasn't an easy thing to do, but clients could tell when you weren't invested in the job. All that got you was a bad time and bad reviews. So I'd learned pretty quickly to shut off my emotions and only concentrate on the task at hand. Let's get the formalities out of the way first, okay? I suggested, pulling out my phone. I did all the required check-ins and so did Javier. I noticed his hand shook a bit as he plugged in the information into his phone. Probably just nerves. That made something in my heart squeeze for him. Every time I was with a John, I tried to genuinely pick out things that were endearing. It was harder with some than others. When I finally did pick out a few traits that I found likable, I concentrated on the positive. It helped me get into the mood faster. And trust me, Johns could sense when you weren't all in. A small smile spread across my face. His nerves definitely made him more human to me. I could work with that. He peered down at me after he powered off his phone. You can call me Javi, he said, sliding his phone onto the top of the dresser. I noticed a few beads of sweat beginning to drip down his forehead. Look, Cherry, I've never done this before, he said, casting his eyes downward. I lost my wife a year ago and I just haven't. I captured his hands in mine. His palms were sweaty too, and I thought that was sweet. And the fact that he shared a horrible event in his life made me sad for him. I'm so sorry, Javi, I said, stepping forward and giving him a hug. That must have been awful for you. He let out a long sigh and held me tight. It was the worst. We'd been together since high school. His voice gave away his emotion as it hitched. I focused on his pain, imagining how incredibly terrible it would be to lose someone you'd shared decades of your life with. Before I knew it, my eyes were getting watery. I gazed up at him and said, How devastating! I bet you're still suffering, aren't you? Really feeling horrible for the man. His fingers moved my hair away from the side of my face. So much. You'd think it would ease up after a year, but it still hurts just as much. As I stared up into his sorrowful eyes, my heart truly bled for him. In my mind, I pictured him as a teenager, holding hands with his young, sweet girlfriend. They'd have a happy life, building a family based on the love they shared. Until one day, she was taken from him. I felt warm and comforted in his arms. I only hoped he felt the same from me. I'm sorry, he said, wiping his eyes. This was supposed to be a way for me to leave the world behind for a while, you know? And instead, I'm crying. his voice raised, showing his turmoil. It's okay, Javi. We can do whatever you feel comfortable with. There's no pressure. Would you like me to lead the way? I asked, offering to take some of the control for him. His face relaxed and he said, Yes, please. That would be great. A more sincere smile I'd never seen. Good. And Javi? Yes. I am very sorry about your wife, I said in nearly a whisper. I bet you miss her a lot. He looked at me with wet eyes and nodded his head. Yeah, every day. I squeezed his hands and said, How about if we sit down for a minute? I asked, not waiting for an answer. Instead, I pulled him gently in the direction of the couch. He sat down first, then I followed, sitting tight next to him. I moved his arm around my shoulders and snuggled in. I started a light conversation, nothing too deep. Just something to ease the strangeness between us. There was something lovable about John's like Javi. He was so open and had such a sad story. And he shared it with me for at least an hour. His wife had a terrible, long illness. She suffered greatly, which meant so did Javi. By the end, we were both crying in each other's arms. He knew his wife would want him to start to live again, and coming to see me was part of his plan to get back out into the world. After we dried our tears, his arm tightened around me and his head began to dip toward mine. I stopped him by placing my finger on his lips. No kissing, Javi. Remember, I said in a small, gentle tone. His eyes closed and he apologized profusely. It's okay, honey, I said, standing up in front of him, knowing it was time to move on. I switched gears and took a deep breath as I steadied myself for the next part of the evening. Would you like to touch me now? I asked while I unzipped my dress. Fell to the floor and I stepped out of it. I always imagined this is what actors must feel like, changing into a character they normally weren't. But, like me, they had a job to do. And the only way to be really convincing was to make yourself believe whatever story you were acting out. Yes, Cherry. Oh my God, you're so beautiful, he whispered as he took in my body standing before him. Pure adoration in his eyes warmed me and eased my transition. I want that too. May I sit in your lap so it's easier? I asked, stepping closer to him now. All he did was nod. His eyes were glued to my breasts. The dress I wore tonight didn't have straps, so I'd nixed the bra. All I had on was a tiny black lace thong. Very slowly, I carefully straddled Javi's thighs and lowered myself down on him. His jaw dropped open, making me smile again. Do you like my breasts? Would you like to touch them? I asked, already knowing the answer from the look on his face. I gently guided his hands to me. Mom, that feels nice, I said, and I meant it. His calloused fingers created a wonderful friction against my nipples. He didn't take his eyes off what his hands were doing. First, his touch was so soft. Then he took a more firm command. Thinking of firm, I could feel his hardness between my legs. He was definitely turned on by what we were doing. Can you kiss my breasts now? I'd really love it if you could do that for me, I said while I undid the buttons on his shirt. His lips touched the swell of my breast, then he kissed his way down to my nipple. I watched as his tongue circled me. Oh, that's so good, yes, I said, my fingers threading into his hair. When I held him closer to me, he finally sucked my hard bud into his mouth. Yes, Javi. I like that, I said, arching my back, pressing myself further into him. A fantastic zinging sensation traveled from my breast to my clit, like they were somehow connected. The worried, apprehensive look on Javi's face was gone and replaced with sheer and utter desire. It made me feel good to know that I was able to take away his pain, even if for just a short time. I started to grind over top of his hot, hard cock. Even though he still had his pants on, I could feel his heat against me. You're so good at that, I mumbled out as he moved to my other breast and played there now. Indeed, he was doing a great job. I could feel wetness start to pool between my legs as he kept admiring my breasts. His hands slid around my back while he continued kissing and sucking on me. I increased my rhythm, moving my hips more forcefully on top of him. He let his hands wander down to my ass and squeeze me tightly, his bare flesh on mine. But his mouth stayed on my chest, content to keep busy there. "Are you ready to move to the bed?" I asked, touching his shoulders and letting my hands rub him lightly. I could feel the tension in his muscles. Javier stopped kissing my breasts and said, "Okay." His voice didn't sound very convincing, but hopefully I could make him feel more at ease. "Good," I said, smiling down at him while I stood up and took his hand. "Follow me," I said in a flirty voice as I backed up toward the bed. "Why don't you pull back the covers and take the rest of your clothes off and I'll grab a condom?" I saw and heard his breathing increase, and his reaction to my words made me happy. He nodded at me before I turned around and found my purse. I grabbed a few condoms, shut my purse, and headed back to the bed. The rest of Javier's clothes were in a heap on the floor, and he had the covers pulled up to his waist. He really was in good shape considering his age. "You beat me," I said, crawling in beside him. I could practically feel his anxiousness. I ripped one condom wrapper open and then I held it up between us. "Do you want to put it on? Or should I?" Most guys wanted me to do it, but I still asked anyway. "You can," he said. His voice was hoarse and choppy, which only made me like him even more. "Okay, honey. I'm going to put it on now." I watched his head slowly move up and down while he gazed at me, his eyes unblinking. I moved the covers over and saw his cock for the first time. It was definitely hard and much bigger than I'd suspected. My pussy clenched just looking at it. His wife had been one lucky lady. I fit the condom over the head of his cock, feeling his long, hard length as I went. Javier's stomach tightened at my touch. "Is this okay?" I asked as I rolled it the rest of the way down. My hand stroked him while I waited for an answer. His cock pulsed in my hand, growing even bigger with each movement. "Yes," he answered, his eyes going back to my chest. "Do you want to be on top? Or should I?" I asked, still working his cock. He pushed up into my hand and said, "Me?" I smiled at him and rolled onto my back. He sat up and clumsily shifted between my legs. My hand moved between us and placed him right at my entrance. All he had to do was thrust forward and he'd be inside of me. "I'm ready for you, Javi." "I want you to fuck me," I said in a sultry voice, hoping to entice him inside. He let out a loud groan when his hips drove forward, impaling me with one hard surge. "Oh, honey. You feel so good. Your cock is so big inside my tiny pussy," I whispered into his ear, spurring him on to fuck me harder. I arched my back, letting my breasts dig into his chest. My fingers clutched onto his shoulders as he moved inside of me. When his lips captured my nipple inside his mouth, I let out a moan, enjoying the sensations he was causing. He sucked harder and I could feel it again directly in my clit. Normally, I didn't react like this for a regular John. Perhaps it was his sad story. Maybe it was the kindness he'd shown me. Whatever it was, I felt an ache down there that needed to be fulfilled. "You're going to make me come if you keep doing that," I breathed out, meaning exactly what I said. The ache had quickly been replaced by that familiar tingling sensation that came right before I did. His mouth darted to my other nipple, roughly teasing it and rolling it with his tongue. Felt incredible. Javier's size stretched me perfectly, hitting all the right spots. And then it happened, my walls squeezed down as I exploded my orgasm around him. "Oh, Javi, yes," I shouted, seeing bright lights burst behind my eyes while he continued slamming his cock into me. "Yes, oh God, yes, just like that." And that's exactly what Javier kept doing until my orgasm was nearly over. Then he sat back on his knees and increased his speed almost double time. His hands landed on my breasts, playing and pinching my nipples as he fucked me. Sweat was trailing down his face, and that turned me on, watching him get ready to blow his load. "Do you want to come inside me?" I asked in a breathless moan. The grip he had on my breasts tightened, then his face screwed up as his eyes shut. He drove deeper inside of me, and I was shocked when, before I knew it, I was coming again. "Oh my God, I'm coming!" I yelled just as I felt him collapse on top of me. He buried his head in my neck as I felt his cock pulse. I clenched around him, crying out my orgasm again while he continued to come inside of me. He blew long bursts of air out against my skin. His hips slowly drew in and out as we both came down from our exertions. "That was amazing," he said, then leaned his head down to give me a small kiss on my cheek. "It really was," I said, kissing his shoulder. His hot skin tasted salty. Javier was a thoughtful, generous lover. A John like him didn't come around very often. Neither did one who could bring me to orgasm not once but twice. After sliding out of me, he got rid of the condom and rolled onto his back, taking me with him. I laid my head on his chest and he ran his fingertips up and down my arm. I wasn't sure if I could still do it. He chuckled, making my head bounce. "I haven't had anyone since, yeah, and I know it sounds stupid, but I worried about how rusty I'd be." I lifted my head and looked into his eyes. "You weren't rusty at all. Can I tell you something?" I asked, setting my chin on my hand. He grinned at me and nodded. "Clients don't normally make me come," I said truthfully. His eyes got watery and his smile grew. "I'm glad you had fun too," he said, watching his fingers move up to touch the swell of my cleavage. "I nearly came in my pants when you were grinding on me." "I had a lot of fun," I said, gazing into his eyes. A second later, he pushed me over and kissed my neck while his hands roamed over my breasts and down to my pussy. I wasn't sure how long he played with me, finger-fucking me in the most incredible way. But it was just long enough for him to make me come. Again. He quickly stuck another condom on, and then he was there, right where I needed him. I let him slide in just like before. Then, he rolled to his back, keeping us connected. "I want you on top this time," he said, his hands holding my breasts almost reverently. "Lean forward a bit so I can lick your huge tits," he said, pulling me closer to him. I was still breathless from my orgasm. He hadn't given me any time to recover. I set my hands on his chest and rose up, feeling his long, hard length as I did. "Sounds good to me," I said, lowering myself back down, loving how completely he filled me. You're so big." His hands slid to my back and pulled me forward. "You are fucking wonderful for my ego," he said, guiding his hands to my head and kissing my forehead as I began fucking him slowly. He kissed and licked down my neck, then he found my breasts again. Once he started licking my nipple, I increased my pace. Felt so good. His mouth and his hands were so hungry for me. I let my head fall back as he sucked, nibbled, and squeezed on me. Each time I moved my hips down on his big cock, I let out a loud moan of excitement. When his hands moved to my hips, he jerked me down harder on him while thrusting himself into me. I could feel the tingling start, and I told him, "Javi, I'm going to come." "You're too good, I can't hold off anymore," I sighed, staring down into his dark eyes. "Give it to me." "I want to feel you come," he grunted out, yanking my hips now with even more force. It hit exactly the right spot, everything did. And soon I felt myself begin to come. "Ah, I'm coming," I said, lifting my hair with my hands, arching my body with the force of the spasms. "Yes, oh yes," I screamed as he continued to pound my pussy down on him. He finally held my hips still against him, and I felt his cock swell even bigger, right before he shut his eyes and grabbed my breasts with his hands. I winced at how hard he held me, but it really felt good. "Fuck," he hissed as he throbbed inside of me. "You're so fucking hot." I savored his grunts, loving the feeling of our aftershocks when I fell forward onto his chest. "I think we just get better and better at this." I laughed into his sweaty chest. He was breathing just as rapidly as I was now. He chuckled, rubbing down my back until his hands found my ass. "Exactly. I guess that means we should keep doing this then, right?" I pushed up on his chest and touched my lips to his neck. Good idea. 8 Eve. Cherry, I had the best time I've had in, well, a long fucking time, Javier breathed out as he held my hands in his. We were going down in the elevator together. He'd only paid for 2 hours, so it was a short night. I had a really great time too, Javi, I said, smiling into his dark eyes. Maybe we can do this again. The elevator pinged and the doors swished open. He walked me out a few steps into the lobby, holding my hand. When he stopped, I turned to him. I will most definitely be calling you again, he said, dipping his head and kissing me quickly on the lips. I allowed it, even though it broke my rules. Javi seemed so happy and relieved. And it was hardly more than a peck. I'm looking forward to it, I said against his mouth. He laughed and slid something into my hand. You can't possibly understand how much tonight meant to me. I want to show you, he said, closing my hand on whatever he'd placed inside. My gratitude. Then he kissed me one more time on my forehead before he turned and walked out. I opened my purse and stuck my hand inside, depositing what was certainly my tip. When I quickly closed the top, I started walking at a hurried pace toward the lobby doors. My shoulders relaxed, and I was glad to be done for the night. I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. And I still had the drive home. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone move off one of the chairs near the door. I stepped further to the right to get out of the way. Then he shifted in front of me. I came to a dead stop, ready to say something mean, when I gazed up and saw who it was. Fucking Nick. My heart nearly beat right out of my chest with shock. The murderous look on his face didn't help any. Have fun, he asked, his tone laced with sarcasm and his eyes filled with violence. I was glad for the witnesses surrounding me. He wouldn't have a fit in public. Would he? I felt like fainting or possibly running away screaming. Instead, I gave him all the sass I could. I was at work, I said snidely to him, placing one hand on my hip. He was not going to make me feel like shit for working to feed my family. I could see the muscle in his jaw tighten. We have things to discuss. Let's go, he said, reaching his hand out for my arm. I backed up, away from him, not wanting to go anywhere with him. I have my car. I'm going home to my house. And you, I said, pointing my finger at him, are going to your house. A sneer formed on his face, and I got even more frightened. You really are fucking delusional to think that. We're leaving. Now, he said, emphasizing the last word as he stared me down. I could feel my knees start to shake and my palms getting sweaty. You're delusional if you think I'm getting into a vehicle with you, I said, standing my ground, hoping he'd give up and leave. He gave me a low, crazy laugh. You've got 10 goddamn seconds. And then I'm picking you up and throwing you over my shoulder. His eyes frightened the crap out of me right now. The insane, intense way he was looking at me gave me chills. And I believed his threats. You wouldn't dare. I challenged him, standing up straighter on increasingly wobbly legs. Nick took 2 more steps toward me, then he leaned down. Test me, Eve. I fucking dare you, he spat out at me, alarming me even more. And then see how quickly you'll get banned from this hotel. Maybe you'll even get all of Alona's girls thrown out of here. For good. Yeah, he was not only threatening me, but my boss and her entire business, which meant a lot of girls would be out of a job if I screwed this up. He made himself clear. If I didn't listen, I'd get Alona and everyone associated busted. Either I saved myself or my boss. There really was no choice. I took a deep breath before I walked out, and Nick followed close behind. Over here, he said, guiding my elbow with his hand. I shirked it off, not wanting to feel his touch. The locks beeped, and he opened my door for me. I slid inside, not glancing up at him at all as he shut my door. When he was in and buckled, I looked out the front window. Nick, this is... But he cut me off immediately. Not one fucking word, he screamed at me, making me jump and clutch my purse. I felt queasy and sick, wondering why he'd shown up to the hotel. and he'd seen me with Javi, kissing Javi, knowing that I'd just finished a session with Javi. I didn't look at him, not once the entire drive. My heart started beating even faster when I clued into the fact that he was taking me to his place. The last place in the world I wanted to be. Nobody to hear us fight or whatever Nick had planned. He pulled into his driveway and I got out, storming up to the front door. I stood to the side while he unlocked it, letting me in first. "Upstairs," he said in a raspy voice, his hand on my lower back pushing me forward. Great. He was taking me to his room. My stomach sunk, and my head swam with worry about being alone with this man. Obviously, he wanted more than to just have a quick chat. Sure enough, we ended up at his bedroom door. My feet refused to move forward, so he pushed me, not gently but not forcefully. He slammed the door behind him, and instead of jumping, I spun around on him. "What do you think you're doing? You can't just kidnap people and make them do whatever you want." A sly smile played on his lips. "Wanna bet," he said, stalking toward me. I stutter-stepped, nearly swallowing my own tongue as I moved away from him as quickly as I could. "You're crazy," I muttered, nearly tripping in my heels. The sardonic laugh that burst out of him made my blood run cold. "You're finally beginning to understand. What do you want from me? One last goodbye fuck?" "Fine, great," I said, dropping my purse on the floor. "I don't know how much I have left in me, but you're welcome to it. Just remember, you promised that you'd never hurt me." I reminded him of his promise, hoping to break him out of his mania. Nick's eyes flared and he walked toward me even faster now. I backed up until my back hit his velvety curtains. "You spread you legs for another man and you automatically think I'll leave? 'Cause I won't. You could fuck 100 guys and I wouldn't leave you." My heart cracked open and I felt like I was falling. He got so close to me now that I couldn't keep his face in focus. "But I will kill every one of those bastards," he said into my ear, and I shivered from his words. "You're mine." I pushed him back, trying to get some room between us. My mind was stuck with what to do. "Stop talking like that," I mumbled out, wondering what kind of madman was standing in front of me. "I want to know why you did it, but to tell you the truth, Eve, I really don't give a shit. It doesn't matter. Whatever bullshit you pull, it doesn't matter because you," he pressed his finger into my chest, "belong to me." He was breathing heavier now, and all I wanted to do was escape. "I'm not yours. You can't buy me, Nick," I said, trying to keep my composure even though I was quickly losing that battle. His eyes wouldn't let mine go. "Everyone can be bought. Especially," he said, talking into my ear, "you." He backed up and turned around, and I hoped he was done and would let me go. He bent down and scooped up my purse. I thought maybe he'd give it back to me and take me home. Nope. Instead, he opened it and took out the roll of money Javier had given me. "You can't be bought?" he asked, cocking his head to the side like a real jerk. Then he started flinging bills around him in the air. "This," he said, continuing to throw the money, "looks like you can be bought." My heart broke in half at his words. Yes, I slept with men for money. But Nick had never made me feel dirty about it. Until now. I could feel tears start to form behind my eyes. "That's right, Nick. I'm a whore. I fuck men for money. It's my only talent, so why not use it, right?" The burn got stronger and I nearly started crying. "You're so much better than this shit," he screamed, tossing the rest of the bills on the floor. "Why? Why would you go back to this when I just sent you a month's worth of money?" His arm flew up in a rage. I yelled back at him, "That's your money. It's not mine, I didn't work for it. You more than earned it." "I didn't, and you know it. I don't take charity either. You can take back the bedroom sets, too. Nobody asked you to buy all that," I said, wiping away a few tears that had escaped. "I can take care of my family. I don't need anyone's help." There was nothing charitable about the bedroom sets. "Let me assure you," he said, stepping in my direction. "That was purely selfish. I wanted to be able to fuck you without alerting the entire household. His voice was even more controlled now, and I didn't know why that pissed me off, but it did. You won't have to worry about that because you won't be at my house, I said, sniffling once and wiping my eyes again. Yeah, I will. If you're there, I'll be there. My chest burned just as much as my eyes did. I shut my eyes and shook my head, not understanding his logic at all. He'd essentially caught me with my pants down with another man, and minutes later, he was insisting we were together, when nothing could be further from the truth. Why are you acting like this? We're from different worlds. You had your fun. Now it's time to let me go, I said, my voice hitching at the end, unable to stop myself from crying. Nick stormed back to me, his hands on my shoulders, holding me firmly. I'm never letting you go, Eve. You're mine. I've already told you that. I can't do this, I said, covering my face with my hands. I can't do this. You have to. There's no choice. Felt like my head was going to burst apart if he said another word. So I brought out the heavy hitters. After I said what I was going to say next, he'd be more than done with me. I let my hands fall to my sides. I'm in love with you, Nick. When I'm whispering it against your lips while I'm coming, I said, staring into his blue, sparkly eyes. I mean it. My stomach and my heart both twisted so violently, I thought for sure I was going to be sick. His grip on my shoulders slackened, and I was thankful to have the wall behind me to hold me up. I didn't regret what I said. It was true. That didn't mean I wanted to hear Nick's hurtful reaction. There was one way to get rid of a man, this was it. Be honest. Tell him you loved him. I already know that, he said, his voice sounding gruff as his eyes searched my face. The air left my lungs and I could barely breathe enough to say, how? Because I love you too. Do you think I treat everyone this way? He asked, but I had no response. My knees were so weak I was in real danger of falling. You can't show me all this beauty, he said, his eyes raking over me, and then take it away. I let in a shaky breath before my eyes got cloudy and I really started crying. He kept talking, though. You can't make me watch horrible 80s movies while you fall asleep in my arms, and then take that away. You can't cry for caged animals at the zoo and then take that away. And you can't give me the best birthday I've ever had and then take that away. His voice was strong and sharp, and it cut right through me. We hardly know each other, I sobbed loudly, not wanting to believe anything that he'd just said. Because if he meant everything, if he gave me everything, then he could just as easily take it away. And that would break me. His voice was low, yet aggressive. From the minute I laid eyes on you, I knew. And so did you. I'm not letting you go, Eve. Who in their right mind would find all of this beauty and joy and set it free? His eyes bore into mine. You are mine. I stared at him for a long moment, not understanding what to do or say next. Everything he'd said whirled around in my head, making me dizzy. Now, I want you to go downstairs to your room and shower. Change into something comfortable. Then call Alona's and quit, he said, his fingertips digging into my skin. You're not going back there. I felt myself begin to slump forward, and I let my head fall onto his shoulder. It's the only way I can support my family. I have no choice. Wrong. You have me. If you insist on working, he said, his hand lifting my chin, and you don't have to. In case you haven't noticed, I'm rich. There's no financial reason for my woman to work. But if you must, then you'll work for me in one of my offices. And I'll pay you double what you were making at Alona's. Now I really did feel faint. I couldn't believe what was coming out of his mouth. I circled him with my arms and held on. Was I really going to trust him? Was I going to let him take control of my life like this? I have family obligations, Nick. I can't just leave my siblings and start a life with you. He chuckled softly. Wherever you need to be is where I am. We'll figure that part out. I've nearly won your sisters over. Asher will eventually be coming back, I reminded him. I know that. And I'm still here. His arms tightened around me. Now go shower and change. I can smell that asshole on you. Then come back to me, he said, kissing the top of my head before he let me go. By the time I caught my breath, he was gone. 9 Eve. I had the longest, hottest shower of my life. Then I blew out my hair and straightened it. The whole time rehashing the conversation I just had with Nick. I actually pinched myself a few times in the shower to make sure I hadn't been dreaming. Nick loved me. Me. He called me his. Mine, he'd said. All this after he found out I just slept with a John. And he kept his promise. He told me he'd never hurt me, and he hadn't. He'd scared the crap out of me many times. But he never got physical with me. Nick loved me. Me. The idea of working for him was both intriguing and intimidating. I wasn't sure how he'd built his wealth. And I didn't know the full extent to how rich he really was. All I knew was what I could see. Even if this was all Nick owned in the world, it meant he had plenty of money. Gobs and gobs of money. The thought of sitting back and letting him pay for everything didn't suit me at all. I wasn't the type of girl to sit around, not earning her keep. So, after I called and talked to Ilona and quit the job that had put food on our table for months now, I decided to take Nick up on his offer. I wasn't sure where his offices were, and he'd said it like there were many, but it might be fun to dress up like a businesswoman and go out to work every day with Nick. I skipped the makeup. It was getting late, and I'd have to go home soon anyway. Someone had stuck my suitcase in the closet. It didn't take me long to pack up my stuff. The only thing I took with me that Nick had bought was a more formal outfit. It had a fitted jacket that would be more than acceptable for office wear. I left my suitcase on the landing and walked up the stairs to Nick's room, but it was empty. Where was he? I decided to head downstairs and see if he was on the main level of the house. The stairs creaked under my feet while I moved down them as quickly as I could. After I dumped my suitcase by the front door, I walked into the dining room but didn't see any sign of Nick. Then I noticed a light on in the living room, so I strolled over there. Nick sat by an ornate lamp. He wore different clothes than what he had on before. His white shirt had a few buttons undone, making him look casual, but still really hot. He looked up from the book he was reading and spotted me. A huge grin crossed his face, and I couldn't help but smile back. "Come here," he said, motioning me over. I did as he asked, maybe swinging my hips a little more than usual. "Hi," I said, stepping between his open legs as he pulled me closer. He smelled clean, and I noticed his hair was slightly wet. I said, bending my head down to sniff him. "Did you shower?" I asked as his hands slid around my waist and pulled me down to his lap. "I did." "I knew you'd be a while," he said, moving my hair away from my neck and placing a nice kiss there. Then his hand traveled up my back to my head. His lips touched mine, and I opened for him. He'd mentioned how much he loved my cherry-flavored gum, so I made sure to chew some while I got ready. I usually grabbed a piece whenever I was nervous or had something to think about. I absolutely had all of that on my mind. But I also wanted to please Nick. "You taste delicious," he said in between kisses. I was surprised when he didn't take things further and stopped our mini makeout session. "Are you ready to go?" he asked, kissing my cheek and inhaling deeply. I nodded and let my head rest on his shoulder. "I'm ready." I raised my head and asked, "Are you staying overnight with me?" "I already told you this. Wherever you are, that's where I'll be." His lips touched mine one more time before we got up to leave. Nick Giselle had been surprised to see us walk through the door together. When I'd been here earlier and found out Eve was out with a client, I'd wanted to break everything within reach. "I tried to stop her, I swear, Nick," Giselle had said. "She's too damn proud for her own good." Waiting for her in the lobby had been the worst thing I'd done in a long time. Part of me wanted to start pounding on doors to try and find her. I'd asked at the desk, but they refused to give out any information. So all I could do was sit in an oversized leather chair while Eve was getting fucked by some faceless asshole. I'd imagined the many ways he was probably screwing her. I wondered for a second if he was a tits and ass man, then I realized every guy was exactly that. And Eve had plenty of tits and ass to please any man. The excruciating wait was painful. I couldn't concentrate on anything, knowing what was going on upstairs. Some other man using Eve's body to satisfy himself. Watching her moan and whimper underneath him as he thrust his cock inside her tight, wet pussy. He'd love watching her tits shake as he fucked her until he finally couldn't help himself, and buried his hard cock while he came like he never had before. I wondered if she'd come too. Would he be good enough to bring her to orgasm? And if so, how many times would she come? If he made her ride him, it might not take her long. Damn, she was a sight when she rode my cock, tits bouncing up and down each time she moved. And the look on her face when she finally succumbed, Christ. Nothing like it. And some asshole might be seeing that exact look right now while she squeezes his cock like a tight, warm vice grip between her legs. Waiting and not knowing had been pure agony. Seeing her come out of the elevator with that old guy had done me in. I wanted to shoot him directly in the face and watch his brains splatter all over the lobby floor. Especially when he kissed her and discreetly handed her a tip, likely for a job well done. Fucking crazy. I saw red, and I wanted it to be his blood dripping down his face as I stabbed him in the eyes. How I controlled myself I'd never know. I was much calmer now, with Eve sleeping in my arms in her bed. Don't get me wrong, I was still going to hurt the guy who'd fucked her tonight, but at least now Eve and I were on the same page. She hadn't gone running off when I told her she was mine. Not that she had a choice in the matter. I wasn't going to give her up. Even if she'd just finished blowing some gray-haired guy a few hours ago. She was mine. 10 Nick. Is it bring your whore to work day or something? Because I didn't get the memo. Chester, my right-hand man at this office, said snidely as he slid into the chair in front of my desk. I cleared my throat. I know you're trying to be funny. But you aren't, I said, knowing exactly whom he was referencing. He laughed, holding his fat gut with both hands. When I didn't join in, he finally stopped. Oh, come on, Nick. We all saw you guys kissing in the elevator. You weren't exactly trying to hide it. That part was true. I did sneak one more kiss before the doors opened, but I hadn't expected to be completely unable to let Eve go. Anyone in the front entranceway saw us in an embrace. You'll be respectful of Eve. I don't care what you think of her, I don't need to know, I said quite matter of fact. He frowned at me and sat up in the chair. You can't be serious? She's here for more than a day, he asked incredulously. She's a permanent fixture. For as long as she wants, I announced, setting my pen down and weaving my fingers together. I was just waiting for him to spurt out some kind of bullshit and give me an excuse to crack him right in the nose. Do you have a problem with that? Chester stared at me for a minute before he frowned again. And what exactly do I put her down as on the payroll? I shook my head and picked my pen back up. I don't care. Consulting, I said, writing an amount down on a piece of paper. See to it she gets that every Friday. I pushed the paper across my desk to him. He picked it up and his eyebrows shot right up the ceiling. You're sure about this? He asked, looking at me over the top of his glasses. Deadly, I said, opening a file and getting back to work. Chester lingered around for a moment before catching the hint and leaving. Near lunchtime, I texted Eve and told her I had a special lunch planned for her in my office. Yay, can't wait, she texted back, making me grin like a fool. I was intending on feeding her, but it wasn't going to be food. A short time later, I heard a small knock on my door. Come in, I yelled toward the door and quickly shoved all the papers back into the file. Mr. Rossetti? Do you still require assistance? Eve poked her nose in. I do. Please shut the door behind you, Miss Hayward. And lock it, I said, already feeling my cock harden. Her outfit really accentuated her cleavage, and I loved it. But I also couldn't wait to get her out of it. She stepped in and locked the door, then leaned her back against it. What exactly can I do for you? She asked, her fingers sliding up to the top button of her fitted jacket. I watched intently as she undid that button, then the other 5, until her gorgeous breasts were exposed. She wore my favorite red lace bra. Christ, she was beautiful. It's lunchtime. I assumed you'd be hungry, I said, widening my legs further apart. You're so considerate, Mr. Rossetti. Always making sure I'm fed, she said right on cue, making me chuckle. I like to look after my employees. She slipped her jacket off and flung it on a small table by the door. Then she began to shimmy toward me. You treat your employees so well. Her fingers found the zipper on her skirt and pulled it down. She smoothly stepped out of it and left it on the floor. Not all of them, I'm afraid. Only the really hard-working ones, I said, taking in the sight in front of me. Her red thong was lovely, but it would have to go. She ran her hands through her hair, fluffing it up in a sensual manner. I work hard. I'm glad to hear that, I said, turning my chair to the side as she walked around my desk. And you're right, she said, kneeling down, beginning to undo my pants. I'm very hungry. The zipper made a loud noise as she yanked it. Her fingers pulled my pants down just enough until my cock popped out. I'm also very glad to hear that. Now I expect nothing but your best effort. As usual. Her plump, red lips smiled up at me. I'll try my best, she said before taking my dick into her hot mouth. Yeah, fuck, I said, placing my hand on top of her head. I want to watch you suck my cock. You're going to take it all. She blinked at me and nodded as best she could. Probably knowing that time was somewhat of the essence, Eve didn't hesitate. She went right to work. I had to assist by pushing her head down so she could take me all the way down her throat. But I didn't mind one bit. The little noises and slurps she made while she sucked me off drove me crazy. When I was nearly at the brink, I pulled her off me. On the desk, I ordered, out of breath. She'd been doing a really great job, but I needed to come inside of her. Eve stood, wiping her mouth. Then she sat on the desk and spread her legs, leaning back on her hands. She still wore her red thong, but that couldn't be helped. I swiftly brushed it to the side as I roughly entered her pussy. I think I'm really going to like having you at work with me, I said between grunts. This was a great fucking idea. After our quickie in the office, I took her out for lunch. It wasn't quite what she'd expected, loaded hot dogs from a food cart while I drove. It was messy, but I was on a mission. Where are we going? She asked, trying her best not to spill on her outfit as she took a small bite. You'll see. I balanced my hot dog, taking extra care not to have it explode everywhere. She laughed at me, then wiped my chin. You made a mess? God, I loved her like this, satisfied and laughing. Enjoying the simple things in life. Thanks, what would I do without you? She blinked at me shyly and went back to her hot dog. Have you heard anything from Len? He thinks Asher will be on the docket today for sure. When he calls, I'll have Lancaster take you home to meet him. At least that was what I assumed she'd want to do. Thanks, that would be great. She turned to me and asked, Where are you taking me? I told Cheryl I'd be back in an hour. Cheryl was the supervisor I'd left her with. I hoped she'd ease Eve into whatever area seemed like the best fit. I gave her a few suggestions, but she'd figure it out. And I told Cheryl I was taking you on a field trip. She shook her head and continued eating. When we'd arrived, Eve said, Why are we here? There's one condition to you working for me, I told her while I wiped my fingers on the thin napkins the vendor had provided. What are you talking about? Her voice was quiet and she sounded unsure. You need to finish your degree. Eve glanced up at me, looking completely stunned. But what do you mean? I grabbed her hand in mine. I mean that while you work for me, you'll also need to juggle classes. At your own pace. There's no rush for you to finish. However, you will finish. I brought her hand to my lips and kissed the back of it. If that means you need to leave during the workday for a class, then so be it. We'll work our schedule around yours, I said, letting go of her hand and undoing my seatbelt. Now, let's go see what classes they still have open. 11 Eve. My life had changed on a dime, and I couldn't remember ever being happier. Somehow, Nick had pulled some strings and enrolled me at the college, even though the semester had already started. My first class was fantastic. And so were all the other ones. I only had class twice a week, so it really didn't interfere with my job. Cheryl, my boss, was really nice. Probably due to the fact that I was her boss girlfriend. I couldn't say that anyone besides Cheryl had been all that friendly. But that's what you get when you're banging the boss, I guess. Anyway, I was still finding my way around the office. Cheryl had placed me in a few different areas to see what I liked best. First, I spent a week filing, which was okay but boring as heck. Then I went to accounting for a while. That was interesting, but I don't think they really needed my help. Now I was back in admin, but more on the customer service acquisitions end of things. This I found fun. My boss and coworkers here were responsible for spotting and then acquiring new real estate that was for sale. I loved the hunt, and they'd even purchased a few of my finds. Nick still called me up regularly for lunches and special one-on-one meetings with only me. And I loved that. And I loved him. More and more every day. He didn't seem to mind sleeping in my crappy house. Did feel a bit more cramped with Nick there now, though. Especially after Asher got home. Those two butted heads constantly. Nick actually had great restraint when it came to dealing with my idiot brother. To show him how much I appreciated his sacrifice, I'd asked Giselle to stay over occasionally so Nick and I could have some alone time at his place. And he always rewarded me for arranging those nights. I never thought I'd feel this way about anyone. And I sure never thought anyone would love me as passionately as Nick does. All in all, I was in heavenly bliss. It's the kind that I'd only read about in romance novels. What are you reading? Nick asked from his side of the bed. He'd been reading some dull business book as thick as a phone book. Nothing, just a book, I said, turning away from him. I could feel him slide in closer, spooning me. What's on the cover? Show me, he asked, grabbing the book with one hand and closing it on my thumb. Why are there 3 guys and only 1 girl? Because it's a reverse harem novel, I said, pulling the book out of his grip. Reverse harem? He spoke into my neck, causing goosebumps to form. So, the woman has a harem of men? He asked, his voice rising on the last word. Yeah. It's a book where the woman has 3 or more lovers, I said, nearly whispering. His hand wrapped around me and grasped my breast. And you're into this? 1 woman with many men. They're love stories, Nick. I'm addicted to Jane Jeffries' books, I said, telling him the name of the author. It's not all about sex, I added, even though a fair amount of her books focused on exactly that. I have to say I'm rather surprised that you read these kinds of books. Is that something you've explored in your personal life? His hand squeezed my breast in the most wonderful way. I pressed my bottom closer to him. No. The only time I had kind of a menage was with you. Other than that, it's all been one-on-one. His tongue licked the edge of my ear. And is this something you're interested in? A menage or more with me and another man? I giggled and turned around. You're all I need, honey, I said, lifting my head and kissing his warm lips. I love you, I whispered against his mouth. He groaned and kissed me deeper. I love you too. Then Nick proved once again that one man was more than enough to fulfill my desires. The next day at work was busy again. I liked it that way. About halfway through the morning, Nick texted me. Come up here. I have something very big and important to show you. I laughed silently to myself as I stood up and grabbed my purse off the desk. When I passed by Cheryl's office, I knocked lightly. "Nick needs me for an errand," I said, giving her a quick wave. This wasn't the first time it had happened, and she never said a word about it. For one thing, I did more than my required workload, even considering I had to leave early for class twice a week. And for another, she knew I was likely sleeping with the boss. I turned right toward the elevator and heard a low whistle coming from behind me. This was not an uncommon thing to have happened to me, but it had never happened here at work. The best thing to do in these situations was to ignore the pig. So I did exactly that as I headed toward the elevators. "Where did you come from, sweetheart?" Besides my dreams, the pig apparently wasn't going to let up. I swung my head around to see a handsome man around Nick's age staring down at me. "That's original," I said with a sarcastic edge to my voice, hoping he'd drop it. Instead, he laughed in a deep, charming, panty-dropping tone. "Oh, I bet you're just full of fire, aren't you?" The way he said it, I felt my nipples start to harden as his gaze swept over me. I swear I could feel exactly what he wanted to do to me just with that one look. "I've been told that more than once," I said in a huff, pretending he had no effect on me whatsoever. The elevator chimed, and I hurried into it. So did the handsome pig. "Looks like we're all alone. I didn't get your name?" he asked, staring directly at my cleavage. "That's because I didn't give it to you," I said, trying to dismiss him. Again, it had the opposite effect. Instead of getting pissed off and leaving me alone, he laughed like he was enjoying every second of our interaction. "Come on, sweetheart. You know you want to tell me," he said, teasing me with his sexy voice. "Actually, I really don't," I responded flatly. And he let out another laugh. Damn this man. The doors opened and I walked out first. "Hold up, gorgeous," he said as he caught up to me. "How about you give me your phone number?" I swiveled my head around and shot him a nasty glance. "How about I don't?" As I hustled toward Nick's office, I heard the handsome pig laugh again. "Good grief," I muttered to myself before I greeted Nick's admin assistant and sped through his door. "Have I ever told you how much I love your listening skills?" Nick asked as he swept me up into his arms. He'd been waiting for me. I let my fingers travel up to his shoulders, then threaded them behind his neck. "You've mentioned it once or twice." He chuckled and dropped his lips to mine. "I was trying to get some work done, but all I could think of was you in this white top." He yanked me closer to his body, and I sighed when he kissed me. Didn't take long for his hand to find its way to my breast. Suddenly, the door swung open and we heard a loud, "I knew it!" yelled out. I jumped away from Nick so quickly, my heart nearly jumped right out of my chest. Nick let out a deep, loud laugh. "Stefan, you bastard," he said, then quickly stuck out his hand to the handsome pig from the elevator. "Why the hell didn't you tell me you were coming into town?" Ah, the handsome pig had a name, and apparently was BFFs with Nick. Wonderful. "You know I come whenever I want to," Stefan said with a sexy grin. Everything the man said sounded like a double entendre, and I was mad at myself for loving it. "You seem to have your own voluptuous surprise right here?" His eyebrows bounced slightly as he winked at me. And yeah, I could feel my nipples tingle as I clenched my lower belly. Nick let go of his friend's hand and turned back to me. His arm slipped around my shoulders and he said, "This is Eve Hayward." Even I could hear the pride in his voice. It made me more than happy to see how eager Nick seemed to show me off. "Eve," Stefan said, his hand reaching out for mine. "What a lovely name." We met briefly in the elevator, where I did my best to get into her panties. That made me silently gasp, but against my better judgment, I shook his hand anyway. "He wasn't successful," I said blandly, glancing over at Nick. Stefan leaned into me and spoke into my ear, yet he gave me a shiver that traveled from my ear all the way down to my pussy. Crap. I was not attracted to my boyfriend's BFF. No matter how conflicted I felt, I took a step back and frowned at him. "I think you mean never." Stefan held onto my hand tighter and laughed as though I'd said the most hilarious thing ever. Oh, Angel, never say never. Then he gave my hand one last, tight squeeze before letting it go. Leave it to you to find the only woman in this entire building who's mine and come on to her, Nick said with a genuine chuckle. I think you mean I found the only gorgeous, lush, beautiful woman in the building. I should have known you'd already claimed her for yourself. It wouldn't be like you to let one this lovely slip through your grasp. Stefan patted Nick on the shoulder and they both laughed again. Barely let her out of my sight, Nick said, shooting me a grin that warmed my heart. That's wise, my friend. But maybe you'd consider sharing a little bit of your good fortune with your best friend? Stefan asked, giving me a sexy half-smirk. And once again my body betrayed me. I felt heat flow through me at his insinuation. I needed to get out of here. How about lunch? A sense of relief washed over me and I felt my shoulders relax. Nick would take his friend out and leave me here. Stefan's gaze raked over me. Only if Eve comes, too? One of his eyebrows raised up, causing another tingle at his look and the likely double meaning of his words. Of course, Eve loves to take long lunches. Don't you, my dear? 12 Eve. They mostly spent their time reminiscing and talking about their old school days. I didn't know this, but Nick had attended an exclusive boarding school in London when he was a kid. It had surprised me that he didn't share this with me. But his impeccable manners now made sense. Any accent he may have had no longer remained. He said that was because he'd lived in the States for his first 5 years. Stefan had disputed that claim and said Nick did have more than a hint of an English accent until he'd been back in the US for a few years. Then he'd lost it. Still, I always could tell there was something more formal about Nick's speech pattern. So, hearing that he'd grown up in the UK made sense. I'd only wished he would have told me about it, and that it didn't take his friend coming back into town for me to find out. They did try to include me in their conversation as much as possible. I knew how it was when you hadn't seen a good friend in a long time. You could gab and gab and gab forever and the time seemed to slip away. Which is what happened as lunch turned into mid-afternoon. I'd excused myself a couple of times to take a break in the ladies' room. And trust me, the ladies' room was more like a spa in this place. Nick had chosen one of the fanciest restaurants in Chicago. They didn't spare any expense on the bathrooms either. I'd sat on the plush couches in the powder room area, texting with Giselle and surfing my social media. After a while, I started to get bored. When I strolled back to the table, I said to Nick, I can get Lancaster to drop me back off at work. You guys stay and enjoy your time together. Nick grabbed my hand and tipped his head to the side. A sudden look of shock showed on his face like he had no idea why I'd want to leave. We can go, he said, looking up into my eyes and smiling with a worried look. No, nonsense. Let's go back to your place, Nick. I forbid Eve's escape. Nothing would make me happier than to really get to know my best friend's woman better. His words again made me feel hot. I gazed down at Nick. It's fine, really. You guys have catching up to do. I'm just in the way. Stefan stood up quickly and dropped his napkin on the table. I love having you between us, Eve, he said with a deadly smirk. We'll go. Let me pay the tab first. Then he hurried off toward the front of the restaurant. Honestly, I'll go to work, I said as Nick stood up and pushed in his chair. We got lost in the good old days, I'm sorry. Stefan is one of my best friends. I would really love it if you stayed with us, he said, dropping his head down and giving me a kiss. The last thing I wanted to do was disappoint him. What was a few more hours of boredom if it made Nick happy? As long as it's okay with work, I said, giving him a hug, loving the feel of his warm body. Angel, you're sleeping with the boss, I heard Stefan say from behind me. If there aren't any perks from that, I don't know what to say. Then both he and Nick laughed again. Back at Nick's, Stefan opened up a bottle of wine and insisted I sit with them in Nick's study. 3 glasses in, I started to feel a little tipsy and a whole lot bored again. I excused myself and said I was going for a swim. Reluctantly, they both allowed it. Once I got into my room, I quickly changed into the bikini I loved the most. Every bikini Nick had bought me fit me perfectly, but the white one made me feel extra sexy. I brushed out my hair so it wouldn't be a knotted mess in the water. Then I removed my makeup again to avoid disaster. There were towels downstairs, so I slid on some sandals with a heel and made my way downstairs. My heels clicked on each step as I walked down, eager to be outside by myself, instead of inside with my boyfriend's bestie who couldn't seem to keep his leering gaze off me. There were no staff in the kitchen when I walked through, and I breathed a sigh of relief that I was almost home free. Until I heard a low whistle echo in the air around me. I stopped short and twisted on my heels to see Stefan holding a half-full bottle of water in his hand. His eyes were once again on my body. He set the bottle down, then strode over to me. "Nick, have you ever seen a more beautiful woman?" he asked, surprising me. I hadn't seen Nick. "There's a reason she's in my house," Nick said, and I turned my head to see him inside the pantry, pulling out a box of crackers. Stefan's hands landed on my shoulders and I nearly backed away. But not wanting to be rude, I stayed put. "I'm serious, man. We've been to some of the most exotic places in the world. Never have I ever seen a woman this stunning before." His eyes trailed over my face, then down to my cleavage, where he spent a longer while staring. "You're 100% correct, my friend," Nick said, observing his BFF with his hands and eyes on me. It hit me as plenty odd that Nick wasn't punching his friend in the nose right about now. I mean, she is almost too much. Stefan's hands dragged down my arms, leaving goosebumps in their wake. "I need a hug, Angel," he said, touching my waist, then wrapping his arms around me. With slight panic, I looked over at Nick, wondering if he was going to freak out. Instead, he smiled even wider and nodded at me to hug his friend, while all I wore was a sexy white bikini. Too shocked to react, I let my hands land behind his neck while he pulled me closer to his body. "Christ, you are fine," he said into my neck, inhaling deeply as his hands touched my back, rubbing the bare skin there. His fingers touched the waistband of my thong bottoms, and I hoped he wouldn't go any further than that. Surely, he wouldn't go any further than that? "Absolutely divine," he said, loosening his grip on me and peering into my eyes. Unexpectedly, his lips touched my cheek, staying there a few seconds too long. He eventually let me go. I stepped back and hurried out the patio doors to escape. Probably an hour had passed by the time they came out to the pool deck and sat down. Neither of them had changed. Nick had insisted that Stefan stay at his house, which apparently was what normally happened when Stefan came to visit. I could feel their eyes on me, even though I tried my best not to look up. Cool water and exercise had worn off any buzz I'd had from the 3 glasses of wine. It was getting close to supper time and my stomach started grumbling. I sauntered up the pool steps and grabbed my towel to dry off. Again, I heard Stefan's low whistle. When I turned toward the men, Nick waved me over. I slid into my sandals and walked in his direction, squeezing out my hair as I went. "Come, sit for a minute," Nick said, patting his leg. Stefan copied him and said, "Maybe she'd rather sit on mine?" As I sat on Nick's leg, I smiled politely at Stefan even though his comments were always of a sexual nature. "Are you getting hungry?" Stefan and I had a light snack, but we need something more substantial. Called Giselle and made arrangements. We are free for the night. A small bit of dread mixed with anticipation traveled over me. "Oh, okay," I said, sliding my arm around his neck. "Would you like me to cook?" "I don't see the staff around." "I told them they could have the weekend off," Nick said, his hand hot on my back. Stefan set his hand on my knee. "You're far too pretty to cook. Go shower and get all dolled up. We'll take you out for a night you'll never forget." 13 Eve. "What are you studying at college?" Stefan asked, taking his first forkful of cherry cheesecake. I debated between the cheesecake or the decadent brownie. The brownie had won. But now that I saw the cheesecake, I knew I'd made a mistake. The brownie was delicious, don't get me wrong. It's just that the cheesecake looked extra fluffy and rich. Darn it. My eyes watched as he brought the fork of dripping cheesecake to his mouth. He opened and engulfed the fork, managing to not spill a drop. Just finishing off my journalism degree, I said, still staring at his lips. He licked them, and I automatically felt my lower belly clench. How wonderful. How many classes do you need? He asked, seeming quite interested. I answered something back to him. I couldn't really tell you what. The cheesecake in Stefan's mouth were far too intriguing at the moment. He filled his fork again and held it up. Would you like to try a bite? I know I certainly would. I inhaled deeply and looked right at Nick. He was smiling and nodding his head at Stefan's fork. Try it, you just might like it. I'd had 2 large glasses of wine. But even so, the way Nick spoke, that sounded like a double meaning as well. No, it's fine. I have this brownie that I'll never finish, I said, pointing down to the chocolate masterpiece in front of me. Open up, Eve, Stefan said, holding his fork closer to my mouth now. There really wasn't much I could do other than causing a scene. So I opened up as Stefan slid his fork inside my mouth. I said, closing my eyes in pure ecstasy. This is so good, I said, savoring every taste in my mouth. Cherries were warm and gooey and sweet on top of the pillowy soft cheesecake. I could sit here all night and feed you, Stefan said before turning to Nick. You lucky bastard. Nick chuckled and set his arm across the back of my chair. Now you need to feed me some of that delicious brownie to pay me back, Stefan said, pointing to the brownie with his fork. I pushed the small plate in his direction, but he shook his head. No, from your spoon. His voice was steady yet firm. He wasn't pleased that I had wanted him to do it himself. My eyes found Nick's and he nodded. I cut off a piece with my spoon and held it up for him. He smiled widely, eating directly off my spoon. Very good, he said to me, his gaze dropping to my cleavage again. You're right, she's an extremely good listener, he said to Nick. I told you, Nick said, leaning over to lightly kiss the side of my face. Stefan continued to feed me several more forkfuls of cheesecake, and asked me to feed him a few more spoonsful of brownie. By the time we were finished, I felt a steady ache setting in, and I didn't quite understand. I loved Nick. Nick was right beside me with his arm around me. But there was something about how Stefan looked and spoke and paid me attention that turned me on. I didn't know what to do with that information. Didn't make me love Nick any less. I didn't want to go off with Stefan and leave Nick here to fend for himself. Pull between us seemed palpable. It was a strange thing I'd never encountered before, and I'm sure I never would again. Stefan wiped his mouth. That was perfect. Now who's in the mood for some dancing? The deep bass of the music throbbed in time with the constant ache in my pussy. Nick and I had started dancing on the crowded dance floor, and Stefan followed shortly after. I moved between them, and due to the lack of room, that usually meant they were both touching me at the same time. Right now, Stefan was behind me, his hands on my hips as we moved to the rhythm. Nick danced in front of me, with a grin on his face while his hands sat a bit higher than Stefan's. 2 men touching me at once. I hated to admit how good it felt. Stefan was always whispering things into my ear about how beautiful I was and how lucky Nick was. When he turned me around, he leaned in close and said, "Kiss me, my angel. I want to taste your perfect lips." I inhaled deeply, shocked at what he'd just asked. Immediately, I turned my head to find Nick. Once again, he was smiling. My eyes shot back to Stefan, and I saw that he was staring intently at Nick. "It's all right, honey. It's just a kiss," he said, then dropped his lips to my cheek. "Go on." His head jerked toward Stefan. Nick wanted me to kiss his best friend? But the real question was, did I want to kiss his best friend who I'd just met today? I looked at Stefan and saw that he wasn't smiling. He seemed a little pissed off. He'd asked me for a kiss and I hadn't given him one. Yet, we'd had a couple of drinks here and I was definitely feeling loose. But was I loose enough to kiss my boyfriend's best friend? In front of my boyfriend? I set my hands on Stefan's wide shoulders and pressed myself closer to him, staring into his eyes the whole time. He finally smiled and dropped his head down, touching his lips to mine. I felt an instant zing flow through me, and my poor pussy began to throb even harder. He groaned, pushing his tongue into my mouth, not exactly giving me any choice in the matter. Not that I minded. My tongue greeted his, and we started what was possibly the most erotic kiss I'd ever had. His hands found my ass and pulled my hips into his. I could feel his long, thick hardness against my belly. The thin material of my dress left nothing to be imagined. Our tongues dueled for control, and I loved every single minute of it. Stefan kissed me desperately, like I was essential for his next breath. His hand dipped under my short skirt, and before I knew it, his fingers were on my bare ass cheek. He grabbed me tighter then and moved his hips harder against mine. If the dance floor wasn't so packed, we'd be putting on quite the show for everyone. But nobody noticed a thing. Or if they did, they watched and didn't say a word. After a few minutes, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Sure that Nick had had enough of watching me make out with his best friend, I turned my head, stopping the kiss. "We should get out of here before you two get any hotter," he said with a loud laugh. Stefan frowned but agreed with Nick. Nick took my hand in his and guided us off the dance floor. That's when I felt someone grab my other hand and hold it. I spun my head to the side and saw it was Stefan. Nick led us to one of the bars, and in the blink of an eye, the bartender produced 3 shots. "One for the road," he announced, handing us each a glass. "To old friends and new," he said with a mischievous smile on his face. "And to new adventures." He winked at me as we clinked our shot glasses against each other's. The dark amber liquid burned on its way down, making it difficult to breathe. I coughed and swallowed a few more times, waiting for it to end. We walked out of there and I officially felt tipsy again. I wasn't sure if it was from the drink or from the makeout session. Either way, I was feeling no pain. Nick must have messaged Lancaster because he was waiting with the limo right outside the front doors. The night was cool and I shivered. "Inside, Angel." "We'll get you warmed up in no time," Stefan said, opening the door for me. Nick had gone around the other side. I hunched down to get inside and felt Stefan's hand on my ass. Nick was already sitting on the bench seat to the right, so I joined him. I felt pretty self-conscious after what had just happened on the dance floor. Nick appeared to be in a great mood. "I'm awfully lonely over here, Eve," Stefan said, patting the seat beside him. "Why don't you come over here and keep me company?" His voice was seductive, and I felt myself get wet at his suggestion. Nick nudged my arm and held my hand. "Could you go make Stefan feel more comfortable?" My heart started beating like crazy inside my chest. "Nick, Please," he asked, his eyebrows going up. "It would make me very happy if you looked after him." To say I was shocked at his words was an understatement. "I'll give you anything you want," Nick whispered into my ear so only I could hear. "Go." He pushed me gently off the seat and held my arm as I tentatively made my way over to the other side of the car. Stefan reached for my hand, steadying me and making sure I didn't fall in the moving vehicle. I sat down abruptly as the car came to a swift stop. "Whoa, stay here," Stefan said with a low laugh, his arms around me, protecting me from sliding forward onto the floor. Classical music started playing, drowning out the sounds of the street. "Did you like kissing Stefan?" Nick asked as he put his phone down beside him. My eyes looked at him and I nodded. "Yes, Nick." I enjoyed kissing Stefan. Stefan's hand started to rub my arm and I shivered. "That pleases me, my dear. I would like you to kiss him again." "Now," Nick said, jerking his head toward his friend. I took in a deep breath and turned Stefan's way. His eyes were half-lidded, and he was already moving toward me. I let him kiss me, even groaning as he yanked me so close to his body. Touch her breasts. I know you've been wanting to do that all day, Nick said, his voice gruff and serious. Just the sheer anticipation of his words made me even hotter. Stefan's hands found my breasts and I moaned. The only way it would feel better would be if it was underneath my dress. She's so soft, Stefan moaned, squeezing my breasts with both hands. Eve, are you getting wet? Nick asked from his seat. I turned my head and answered him, my voice breathless. Yes, so wet. It was difficult to fill my lungs with how fast my heart was beating. I felt a small rumble come out of Stefan's mouth. Is Stefan hard for you? Can you touch him, please? I did what Nick asked, placing my hand on his obvious hardness. He's hard, I said, touching Stefan with my fingertips over his pants. He practically growled. Perfect. Take her dress off now, Nick ordered, and I felt so lightheaded I was glad to be sitting. Stefan's fingers found the zipper on the back of my dress and pulled it down. The front of my dress went slack. He gently slipped the silver material over my shoulders and eased it the rest of the way down to my waist. I could feel his breath on my chest while I arched my back and shimmied the dress over my hips. He slipped it down my legs, so now all I wore was a pair of silver stilettos. Help him out of his clothes, please, Nick requested, and I obliged immediately. My fingers shook slightly as I undid the many buttons on his white shirt. White. White was meant for heroes, and Stefan was no hero. I pushed the sleeves down his arms, and he ripped it off the rest of the way. Then I gazed into his eyes before my fingers found the button on his pants. It was easy to pull that open and unzip over top of his large bulge. He helped me take his pants down his legs and then dealt with his shoes and socks. Now we were both naked on the back seat of the limo. I looked over at Nick again, and I felt out of breath and achier than I'd been in a long time. Is she ready for you? Nick asked his friend, and my mouth opened slightly. Stefan's hand snaked up my thigh, then dipped between my legs. The feel of his rough fingers on my bare pussy was amazing. He glided through my wetness and over top of my clit. He grinned at Nick and said, "Oh, she's definitely more than ready. Is he hard enough?" Nick asked as he leaned his elbow against the armrest. I looked down at his cock. It was in full view and poking straight up. We could all see how obviously hard Stefan was. But that wasn't Nick's agenda. He wanted me to touch his best friend's cock. And he wanted to watch. My hand landed on him, circling around his stiffness. I stroked him, feeling the veiny length of him. He felt like hard steel and soft, smooth velvet. Yes, he's hard enough, I told Nick while I continued pumping my hand up and down. A few drops of wetness emerged from the head as I circled it with my thumb. This pleases me to no end. Lay down. Spread your legs, he said, and now I absolutely knew for sure what was going to happen. I mean, it didn't take a genius to figure out. But I'd wondered how far he wanted to take this. And now I knew. I did as he asked, laying down and opening my legs for his best friend. A rush of excitement rolled inside of me at what was next. All right, buddy. It's showtime. She's all yours. I know you want to fuck my girlfriend, right? The way you've been staring at her since you met, I know that's what you want to do. Nick's tone was choppy yet matter-of-fact. Stefan looked over at him. Yes, I've wanted to fuck your girlfriend all day. Nick nodded. Then get to it. He crawled between my legs and kissed me roughly, barely able to control his need. His hardness rested against my pussy, creating such a deep-seated ache, I wished he'd hurry up and enter me already. His lips trailed down my neck, kissing and licking to my breast. He greedily sucked my nipple into his mouth, making me shout out, "Ah, yeah!" I slid my hands up his muscular back and into his hair, holding him to my breast. Does that feel good? Nick asked, his voice a lot higher now. I rolled my head to the side and said, "Yes, so good." My mouth was dry from panting. When he let go of my nipple, he backed his hips up slightly as his hand went between us. His hard cock was right at my entrance now, wet and aching for him to start fucking me. And that's exactly what he did after he plunged forward inside of me in one quick, brutal movement. "Oh!" I shouted, loving the feel of his thick, hard cock shoved inside, opening me up for him. Then he started powering inside of me at such a quick pace I didn't know what to do. He was building up such a delicious sensation, and he'd barely been inside of me. He grunted as his hips pistoned in and out relentlessly. I couldn't catch my breath, but I didn't want him to stop either. This was the only way he could relieve the ache I'd had for so long. "Do you like the way my friend is fucking you?" I could barely hear Nick's voice over the classical music and our heavy breathing. "Yes, I love how he's fucking me," I said, staring right into Nick's eyes. He smiled such a deadly, dark grin, I felt my walls tighten up immediately. "Oh God, I'm going to come," I said, digging my fingers hard into Stefan's back. His muscles were taut and working so hard I soon fell over the edge. "Where should I come?" Stefan turned his head to Nick, demanding an instant answer, which Nick seemed pleased to give. "Come inside of her pussy. She's been wanting that all day too." I shut my eyes as the spasms rode through me, clenching his dick as he came in spurts inside of me. Stefan hissed as he stilled his hips, holding me tightly while we succumbed to our desires. "You," he said, finally raising up enough to look at me, "are absolutely perfect." We smiled at each other before he lowered his head down to kiss me so soft and so gently I felt my eyes begin to water. He kissed me for a while until the car came to a stop and Nick announced we were home. 14 Eve. Nick assisted me with getting my dress back on and fixing my wild hair. Once Stefan was mostly dressed, Nick opened the door and helped me out. He held my hand, guiding me inside the house. None of us said anything until we were at the second floor landing. "Thank you, Eve. That was beyond fun." Stefan grabbed one of my hands and kissed the back of it before he turned and strode down the hall. Nick pulled my hand, leading me up the rest of the stairs to his room. When we were inside, he shut the door and started taking off his clothes. "Let me shower first." "I'll be quick," he said, then walked to the bathroom. I stared at myself in the mirror above the dresser. My makeup was still on and surprisingly not melted off my face. Considering all the dancing I'd done, followed by what happened in the back of the limo just now, I still looked okay. I undid my dress and let it fall to the floor. I stepped out of it and bent down to take off my heels. When I stood back up, I had to hold onto the dresser or risk falling. I didn't feel drunk, but my reaction time obviously wasn't the greatest. I caught sight of my body in the mirror. My nipples were still hard and pink, and a little sore from Stefan's attentions. My hand slid down to my pussy where I felt Stefan leak out of me and dribble down my thighs. I still couldn't believe that Nick had allowed his friend not only to fuck me, but also to come inside of me. The level of trust between those two must run deep. "I'm done," Nick said, exiting the bathroom with a white towel wrapped around his waist. He used a smaller towel to dry his hair as he walked into the room. Not wanting to discuss what had just happened until I'd showered and calmed down a bit, I hurried to the bathroom and took a hot shower. The water felt fantastic on my body. I put my hair up in a messy bun so it wouldn't get wet. I stood there for long minutes, letting the heat from the water penetrate my body and my soul. I used my favorite soap that smelled like vanilla. As my hands ran over my skin, I remembered how it had felt when Stefan had touched me. Soon, another ache had started between my legs. This was all so confusing to me. Why I was craving Nick's best friend confounded me. I loved Nick. He was all I wanted. But when Stefan was around, my body responded to him without my approval. I'd never in my life been attracted to two men at the same time. I shook my head and finished up my shower. After I brushed my teeth and made sure my makeup was properly removed, I let my hair back down. Definitely needed help. I picked up the hairbrush and got the knots out of it. Then I strolled into the bedroom and chose a pretty pink negligee to wear. This one went down to my ankles, and I loved the luxurious texture of the silk. Touched my skin with the gentle fingertips of a cautious lover. I could feel my nipples harden again as it moved across my breasts. Nick was already in bed, the covers up to his waist. He had a book in his hand which he promptly set down as soon as I pulled the blanket back. He put his arms out to me, and I gladly snuggled up into his side. "We should talk about what happened today," he said, his hands running up and down my arm and back. "I'm sure you must have some questions." I nodded and asked, "Have you two shared your girlfriends before?" Nick cleared his throat and kept rubbing. "Yes, Stefan and I have been sharing women since we were teenagers." Wow, I had not expected to hear him say that. So they'd probably been sharing women before I was even alive. "Why?" He chuckled a low, deep laugh. "Did you have fun tonight?" he asked, and I nodded. He knew I had. "Exactly. That's why. Have one of you ever gotten jealous?" I asked, playing with his chest hair while I waited for his answer. He's a very, very important part of my life. My early years were challenging, and Stefan was always there for me. We have a great deal of trust between us. And when you share that with someone, then it's easier and more fun to share in other ways as well. Nick rolled me onto my pillow and he leaned against his elbow. There's no jealousy because we both want the best for each other. He knows how much I love you. His fingers danced over the silk material on my breasts. He'd never try to take you away from me. He loves me and also loves that I found someone like you. His hand rested on my breast and he played with me. And I love him and trust him so much that sharing you with my best friend makes me happy. You liked watching him fuck me, I stated the truth. I'd watched his face while Stefan had touched me and fucked me. Nick got off on it. Absolutely. A huge smile tipped up the corners of his lips. Yes, I very much liked watching him fuck you. I get to see you close up when we fuck. And it's unbelievable. But watching another man touch you and kiss you, watching your reaction to his attentions, is amazingly satisfying. Even though it was many degrees of fucked up, in some odd way I understood what he meant. Watching you with Charmaine was hot, I said, starting to feel a wetness between my thighs again. But I felt jealous. He grinned and kissed me sweetly on the lips. Yes, because you didn't love Charmaine. You knew Charmaine had an agenda. She was your competition. There is no competition between me and my friend. He knows you're mine, and he respects that. It's a lot to wrap my brain around. I sighed, Nick's touch getting more urgent now. Then don't try to wrap your brain around it. Just accept it for what it is. He's my best friend. Has been for years. We had some fun tonight, but nothing changes between us. You're still mine and I'm still yours. The look in his gaze was so genuine, I felt like crying with relief. A large part of me had been scared that he'd be mad about what had happened, even though he'd been the one to instigate it. A short knock sounded on the door and I frowned at Nick. Nobody was home to knock. Except Stefan. "Come in!" Nick yelled loudly, and my heart again started to beat erratically. The door opened, and in walked Stefan. He wore a white robe that I'd seen in the guest rooms downstairs. His hair was wet, and his feet were bare. I was lonely down there all by myself. "Thought I'd come up and see if you guys were doing anything fun," he said, closing the door behind him. Nick laughed and moved us over. Stefan undid the belt on his robe and let it drop to the floor. Climbed in beside me. I could smell the fragrance of shampoo and aftershave waft over me. He smelled yummy and clean, just like Nick. "I was thinking about something during my shower," Stefan said, peering down at me. "What were you thinking?" Nick asked. "I was wondering if Eve tastes like cherries everywhere." My thighs tightened, and I felt another rush of wetness. "Well, there's really only one way to find that out," Nick said, a hint of laughter in his voice. I gazed up and saw how much he loved having his friend in this bed. Stefan sat up and pulled the covers down slowly. He and Nick slid my negligee up my legs. I hadn't bothered putting on panties, so I was now bare from the waist down. Stefan kneeled between my legs and spread my knees further apart, exposing me even more. I could feel my pussy pulse, waiting to have his lips on me. "Beautiful everywhere," he murmured sweetly, kissing up my thigh. "Ah," I said, rolling my eyes shut as my breathing became more rapid. Knowing how close he was to my core drove me insane. I looked up at Nick and saw him watching me. "Do you want Stefan to lick you?" I nodded and said, "Yes, so much." Stefan stayed on his trajectory and soon his lips were on me. "Oh yes," I said, still looking at Nick. His eyes were observing what was going on between my legs. He looked back at me. "Watch him eat you," he said, his voice gruff and low. I lifted my head slightly and clenched down deep when my eyes met Stefan's. He stared at me longingly with his dark, hooded eyes. The way he licked and sucked on me so intently, I could already feel a lovely thrill run through me, warning me about what was about to happen. How he'd gotten me to the brink so quickly, I had no idea. But I knew my body, and my orgasm was imminent. "I think I'm going to come," I breathed out forcefully, still not believing I was about to implode already. Stefan's hand slipped under my bottom and pulled me closer to his face. That only intensified the sensations he was creating, until his warm lips wrapped fully around my clit and sucked. "Oh, God!" I screamed, reaching for Nick's hand and holding on to him for dear life. My pussy exploded and I felt a gush of wetness escape. If I wasn't in such ecstasy right now, I might feel self-conscious. "You're so beautiful when you come," Nick practically purred as he held my hand and stroked the side of my face. "I agree, she puts on quite a show," Stefan said, back to kneeling again. He used his hand to wipe his wet chin. I'm afraid I was a bit too eager in the limo. And it was dark. I didn't get to take in your curves like I wanted to. Nick gently pushed me up, and then both men slid my negligee over my head. I laid back down as Stefan laid on top of me, just like he had in the car. Simply amazing. I've never seen such astounding beauty in my life. "Have you?" he asked Nick. "Never. Not once." My head was swimming with their adoration, and I didn't realize what was going on until Stefan began to push inside of me. He wanted me again, and I wanted him. "Oh," I said, letting out a long sigh, loving how thick he felt inside me. "So tight," he grunted, forcing himself in all the way. "You feel so good, I never want to leave." His hips started thrusting forward faster now, and he stared down at my breasts. He pushed up slightly, then found my nipple with his mouth. "Yes," I said, watching him suck my hard bud between his lips. My hands found his shoulders and I held on as he drove himself in and out of me, creating such a deep, aching throb in my pussy I needed to feel relief. Now. I felt his rough hand reach for my other breast and squeeze and play with it while he kept fucking me hard. I could feel myself tighten around his relentless, pounding cock. There was nothing I could do. I had to let go. "I'm coming, oh God, I'm coming so hard," I gasped, my mouth dry from panting. Stefan sped up and I clung to his shoulders as I convulsed around him. A few seconds later, he bucked inside me and yelled, "Fuck yes, oh yeah!" His breath blew over my bare breasts as he emptied himself in my wet pussy. Barely a minute later, he covered me with his body and said, "From my count, you've had 3 orgasms, I've had 2. Then he looked over at Nick. "And your man hasn't had one yet." He peered down at me. "How about you suck on his dick and make him happy?" I pulsed around his cock, and he definitely felt it. He glided in and out of me and chuckled. "Yeah, I'd say you like that idea. Let's move over to the side of the bed." After Nick jumped out of bed, Stefan's arms circled around my body and slid me over. "Sorry, man. I just can't give up this pussy." He smiled at Nick as he stayed connected to me. "Careful, she's addictive," Nick said in a funny tone. I looked up at him. He held his stiff cock in his hand, pointing it directly toward my lips. This would be my first menage, and I couldn't wait. I knew that both of these men would take perfect care of me. They'd use my body to please themselves, but their top priority would always be me. My mouth opened for Nick, and he took the first chance to slip deep down my throat. I said, closing my eyes and letting him fuck my mouth slowly. Then I felt Stefan begin to drive himself into my pussy at the same time. 2 hands went to my breasts, playing with my nipples. One of Nick's hands was on my head, so I knew that Stefan was touching me too. How can her pussy be this incredible? I heard Stefan ask as he kept fucking me harder and harder. It was difficult to concentrate on Nick's cock with how effectively these men were stimulating my body. I felt 2 hands run down my thighs, then to my stomach, stroking me so gently goosebumps formed across my skin. A hand still played with my breasts, touching one and then the other, rolling my nipple between thick, greedy fingers. It was too much. Too much sensation. Just too much. My brain didn't know what to focus on. "I'm close, are you?" I heard Stefan's voice. "Yeah, real close," Nick answered back. Their words caused me to clench around Stefan's cock even more. Christ, she's not going to last long. She'll blow as soon as I touch her clit. "Do it," Nick bit out, shoving himself deeper inside my throat. "Fuck," Stefan said, just as I felt fingers find my clit and pinch it gently. And he was right, I did explode. It was hard to breathe with Nick pumping even harder into my mouth and Stefan plunging inside of me, filling my pussy with his big cock. Then I felt them both come. Nick's cock swelled even larger in my mouth right before he came in large bursts down my throat, and I swallowed every bit of him. Stefan groaned as he emptied himself inside of me. His cock twitched over and over again as he gave me everything. "Unfucking believable," Stefan said, finally pulling out of me and flopping onto the bed. Nick had already pulled out of me and wiped my mouth with the back of his hand. "I told you how lucky I am," he said, gazing at me while he answered his friend. I smiled at him, feeling like the lucky one. I shuffled over on the bed, making room for Nick to crawl in beside me. Stefan rolled closer to me and let his hand roam my body. He set his hand on my breast and stroked it. So perfect," he mumbled, dragging his fingers over to my other breast. His eyes followed every move his hand made. "That she is." "In every way," Nick said, leaning down to kiss my swollen lips. His hand traveled lower, rubbing my pussy. "You're so wet. Stefan came inside of you 3 times, he said against my lips. "Did you like it when fucked you until he came?" "Yes, Nick," I answered back honestly. "That pleased me greatly, watching my best friend come in your pussy. Did you like having 2 men inside of your body at the same time?" My body shivered at his words. "Yes, I loved it. I hope you guys did too." "It was difficult to concentrate sometimes," I admitted, unsure if I did exactly what I was supposed to. They laughed in unison. "That's the whole point," Stefan said, playing with my hair now. "Losing yourself with people you trust and care about can be wonderful." Nick laid back and Stefan lowered his lips to mine. "And for the record, I've had the best time tonight." "Thank you, Eve," he said, kissing me deeper this time. Then he laid his head down and he moved his hand to my breast. Nick's hand touched my stomach and my pussy. Feeling exhausted and still a little tipsy, I fell asleep in minutes. 15 Nick. I waited until they were both asleep before I carefully removed my hand from Eve's body and slipped out of bed. Once I found some clothes, I carried them down to my office and got dressed there. I had work to do and things to check in on. When my phone powered on and I saw how many messages there were, I wanted to throw it against the wall. I had been feeling incredibly relaxed from a fun day and evening. And now real life was going to throw a bucket of ice water on the whole thing. "What's going on?" I said as soon as Frank answered. "We've got a situation." I let out a loud huff. "There's always a fucking situation." "What's going on now?" Another punk nosing around, Frank said, and now I really wanted to throw my phone. Then look after it. Christ, what the hell do I pay you people for? I yelled into the phone. He says he knows you. What do you mean? He said you're dating his sister. For the love of all that was holy. I'd had to go down to the warehouse and check this out. And sure enough, if it wasn't that little jackass tied to a fucking chair, I wanted to strangle him. This him? I asked, jerking my head toward Asher, pretending I didn't know him from Adam. Yeah, boss. He said you two are practically related, Frank said, rushing up to me. Do you want us to get rid of him? His eyes lit up with the prospect. I'm going to deal with him myself. You guys go on home, I said, rolling up my sleeves and grabbing one of the knives off the wooden crate to my left. You sure you don't want no help? One of the other guys asked, coming up to stand with us. I shook my head. Nope. I'm in a mood tonight. I don't like getting called out of a warm bed, I said, testing the sharpness of the knife against my thumb. Ha ha ha. Frank laughed like a machine gun. We got ya, boss. They turned to go toward the doors. Incidentally, what was he doing? Frank swung around and said, Oh, he broke into your office on Rochester Street. Caught him taking pictures of some files up there. My blood ran cold. This was no teenage prank gone wrong. The little fucker had an agenda. Thanks. He won't be doing that again after tonight. I can promise you that much. They laughed and hurried out of the warehouse. I walked circles around the little prick, scuffing my shoes on the dusty concrete floor. His chest rose and fell like crazy. Obviously, he was panicked. Took me a while to think about exactly how to handle this. When I was confident, I stopped in front of him and ripped the duct tape off his miserable mouth in one quick motion. Fuck you, he said, twisting his head to the side in pain. He was such a pathetic sight, I wanted to laugh. No, fuck you, I said, angry as hell at him. What the hell were you doing in my office? I asked, waiting for an answer. Saying what kind of shit you're into. I wonder what Eve's going to think when she knows who she's fucking every night, he spat out at me. Now I really wanted to kill him. You're going to tell her absolutely nothing, I said, standing behind him, holding the knife to his throat. I love your sister. She's mine. Ha, she won't be once she knows what you're involved in, he said with a forced laugh. I slapped him good and hard across his sniveling face. You do that and it'll be the last fucking thing you ever do. His cheek turned a bright red, but I hadn't broken the skin. And it'll be the last time you fuck my sister, he screamed at me, his eyes tearing up now. I grabbed him around his throat. Let's get one thing straight between you and me, I said, lifting him up until I saw pain register on his face. I had to hand it to him. Most guys would have cried uncle by now. I own this fucking town. I own your sister. And, I said, lifting him up further, I own you. He screamed out in agony until I dropped him down. His chair landed with a loud, jarring thunk. Do you know who's paying for your lawyer? Do you know who paid for your bail? I bent down and shouted at him, me. And I can either save your ass or send you up the river for as long as I fucking want. Now tell me who sent you. Nobody. I kicked one of the legs of the chair, spinning him around. Cracked off and flew to the side, but he still kept it balanced with his feet. Try again, I screamed, ready to send him flying with the next kick. Why should I tell you? I don't care about going to jail. I kicked another leg of the chair. This time the whole thing toppled over, Asher included. As I bent down, I used my knife and ran it down his cheek, past his neck, and kept going. You know what they'll call you in jail, my friend? I said in the most sadistic voice possible. My knife dragged down his chest and stomach until it stopped between his legs. He let out a whimper. Fresh meat, I said with a smile. Yeah, you're gonna be real popular the first few weeks. I pressed the knife in further, but still not cutting him. Everyone will want to get up close and personal with a pretty young boy like you. He shut his eyes and started crying. Finally. Is that what you want? To be some rapist's boy toy? Castaneda, he whispered, barely audible. What did you say? I asked, pressing the knife in even more. Castaneda. It was Castaneda, he whined in a high voice, tears falling from his eyes. Motherfucker. Motherfucking pain in my ass, Castaneda. I removed the knife and he let out a huge sobbing cry. You talk with him yourself? I asked in a calm voice, hoping he'd spill even more. Months ago, yeah. But this job I got from his goons, he said, still blubbering on his side on the floor. And you haven't seen him since then? No. His goons told me to break into that office and take pictures of those specific files. That's it. Fuck Castaneda. I took off Asher's shoe and sock, and he started to kick at me. Hey, stop, I told you everything. And then I sliced my knife against his cold, sweaty flesh. I watched as his blood dropped onto the floor. When I got home, I chucked my keys by the front door and stormed up to one of the guest rooms. I ripped off my clothes and left them on the tile floor. Then I turned on the shower as hot as I could handle it and got in. I used the soap to clean the filth off my body, not wanting to carry so much as a hint upstairs with me to bed. Took a good while to clear my mind of what I'd just come from. But eventually, my cock stirred when I thought about what was waiting for me upstairs. Christ, Stefan was right. Eve could put on a fucking show like no one else we'd ever shared. And I wanted nothing more than to climb back in with her and watch a repeat performance. As soon as I was clean, I shut the shower off and grabbed a towel. Didn't take me long to dry off and make my way up to my room. I opened the door quietly, not wanting to wake them. Oh yes, don't stop, Eve moaned as Stefan drilled into her. She had her legs wrapped around his waist, and he was going at her with unrestrained force. It was fucking beautiful. And hot. Watching her share herself with the one other person in this world that I loved was rewarding as hell to watch. I'm going to come inside of you again, Stefan said in a stuttered voice, unable to control his need. Come inside of me, honey, she said, tightening her arms around him. Neither of them had seen or heard me. I stood with my back against the door, observing. My cock poked out from my towel, and I reached down and stroked it, never taking my eyes off my friend fucking my woman. Can't get enough of you, Stefan grunted out, nailing her even harder now. Eve didn't seem to mind one bit. Yes, she screamed out in ecstasy. I'd heard her yell like that many times. Watching her do it while she came around my friend's cock made me even hornier. Stefan let out one final roar before he planted himself inside of her. You are going to be the death of me, woman, he said before taking her lips with his and kissing her. She fully participated in the kiss, letting out little moans of pleasure. Is this a private party? Or can anyone join? I asked, dumping my towel on the floor and heading to my side of the bed. They stopped kissing and Stefan rolled off Eve. I smiled down at Eve and she grinned. Hi, she said, completely out of breath. We didn't see you there. I let out a laugh and said, No, you two were fairly busy. After I crawled into bed, I took over Stefan's spot on top of Eve. Is it my turn now? I asked, kissing her lightly on the lips. It's always your turn, Nick, she muttered against my lips. I like that answer. Then I stopped talking and took my turn. 16 Nick. How's business? Quiet, Stefan asked me, but his eyes stayed glued to Eve's bikini-clad body in the pool. I couldn't blame him. Through all, she was quite a sight. I wish, I sighed, taking a sip of my whiskey. It was late afternoon, and the sun shone hot, giving us one last burst of summer before fall would undoubtedly creep in. He turned to me, squinting his eyes. More trouble. I nodded and finished my drink. More trouble. Castaneda's going to make a play. I just don't know when. No shit, he said, shielding his eyes from the sun. How do you know? He's checking out our home base. Stefan sat back and shook his head. The bastard wouldn't do that unless he wanted to move you out. I know. I'd finally accepted that fact last night. It was something I tried to deny, but I couldn't sweep this shit under the rug anymore. At least I knew Archer wouldn't be messing around with Castaneda's group anytime soon. I'd sliced up his foot nicely and told him to stay the fuck home. For one thing, I needed some blood spill for the guys to clean up today. Couldn't let them think I'd gone soft. And for another, Archer needed to be taught a lesson. There was a hierarchy in this city, and I was at the top. And he was not. If he continued to mess with me or fuck things up with Eve, there would be consequences. And slowing the little prick down for a while seemed like the best thing for all involved. Including him. He was a senior in high school, more than on his way to being a man. The little idiot needed to be smart. The last thing I needed was for Archer to go running back to Castaneda. Stefan's face got even more serious for a moment. You got eyes on her? He asked, nodding toward Eve. You need to keep her safe. I nodded and said, she's with me 24 hours a day. That was true. Except for when she was at school. I'd have to talk to my guys about driving her there and back. He want a war? I bit the inside of my cheek, not wanting to think about that. It's starting to look like that. Had to deal with more bullshit last night. That's where I was when you were inside my woman. He gave me a grin. Best fucking visit I've ever had, he said, and we both laughed. He sobered up some and turned to me. If you need any help with that asshole, you know you can call on me. His caring tone and the fact that he still had my back gave me a warm feeling in my chest. I know. Thanks. I turned and saw Eve shimmying our way, her body dripping with pool water. Her breasts bounced with each step she took. Hopefully it won't come down to that, I said, doubting what I said before it even came out of my mouth. What are you guys laughing about? Eve asked, slightly out of breath as she dried off with a towel. Stefan just said this has been his best visit, I said with a light chuckle. I'm wondering if you could make it even better? Her eyes shot from mine to Stefan's, then back again. I could do that, she said, her pouty lips forming a naughty smile. No need to dry off when you're just going to get wet all over again, Stefan said in a rumbly, sexy tone. Is that right? She asked, dropping the towel on the deck and going over to straddle my best friend. All he did was nod before he took her in a tight lover's embrace. He kissed her breathless as I watched. And then she made his visit even more memorable. Eve, my long weekend had been a dreamy escape from real life. Sharing a bed with Nick and Stefan was one of the most exciting things I'd ever done. This morning when we dropped Stefan off at the airport, he said, I'm going to miss those lips of yours. I love how they look wrapped around my cock. My nipples had instantly gotten hard. Why don't you do that one more time for him? It would be a nice way to send my friend back home, Nick said, kissing me gently on the lips. Then he encouraged me to sit beside Stefan. Stefan touched his lips to mine and we started making out right in front of Nick. I let my hand trail down and touch Stefan's hardness through his pants. Didn't take me long to undo the button and zipper. Once I slid my hand inside and touched him, he quickly shoved his pants down. He didn't take his eyes off me as I slipped onto the floor on my knees and took him into my mouth. His groan had filled the car. I want your tits out, Angel, he said, undoing the tie behind my neck. My top fell down and Stefan had played with my breasts until I'd made him come down my throat. I'm going to miss you so much, he said when he kissed me goodbye. I still felt tingly just thinking about it. My car shook me out of my daydreaming, literally. Spurted and spat and then just flat out died. Crap. I was already late for class. I really didn't need this right now. Smoke was coming out of the hood, so I jumped out to investigate it after I pulled the lever in the car. I wasn't quite sure why I'd done that, but it seemed like a good place to start. My hair was up in a bun, so at least it didn't get in my way as I leaned over and waved my arm around, sweeping the smoke away. I could finally see the inner workings of the car. And I still had not one clue about what to do. Damn it, I said, stomping back around to the driver's seat. This project was worth 30% of my final grade. If I showed up late or not at all, my professor would not look kindly at me. I grabbed my phone and dialed Nick. He picked up immediately. I'm about to go into a meeting, my dear. What can I do for you? His voice was low and smooth, and I let it float around me for a few seconds. You can tell me how to fix a smoking car? I huffed, fanning at the engine again. Wasn't this just typical? The universe was clearly making me pay for the wonderful weekend I just had. There was dead silence. Excuse me, he said, his voice sharp and crisp. My car crapped out on my way to class. I managed to pull over to the side of the road, but I think it's dead. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a car stop behind me. Since when do you have class on Mondays? I sighed and reminded him. We have a presentation, remember? The sun shined in my eyes, making it difficult to see his face, but the guy was making his way to me. Oh, never mind. Someone stopped to help. I'll call you back. I adjusted my sunglasses, but the glare was still too bright. Eve. Stop. Do not. Need some help? The man asked. He wore a hat and sunglasses. His voice and smile seemed vaguely familiar. Pointed to the hood of my car with my phone, still hearing Nick going on about something. Do you know anything about? That was when another set of hands grabbed me from behind, covering my mouth. I dropped my phone and dug my nails into his hairy arm. Didn't matter how much I kicked and fought, he was bigger and stronger than I was. Instant panic flowed through me as I tried my hardest to wrestle out of his hold. I bit down on his thick arm. Stop it, bitch, the faceless man behind me screamed before everything went black. Yikes. Do you need to know what the heck happened to poor Eve? So click here to go to Book 3, A Billion Reasons.